Nwando, please don't be angry that I stopped you. I have admired you for many years. I have come to ask if you will allow me to speak to your father. I want to marry you.
Marry me! You, Obiora, have you looked at yourself in the river lately? Or did the sun blind your eyes this morning?
I may not be the richest man in the kingdom, but I will love you, respect you, and take good care of you all my life.
Love? Can love build a mansion? Can love dress me in gold? Can love make me the wife of a great chief? Look around. Do I look like a woman who was born to marry an ordinary farmer like you?
A good husband is not measured by the size of his wealth. He is measured by the size of his heart.
Keep your poor heart. I am waiting for a wealthy chief, a man whose name makes kingdoms tremble, not someone who spends his whole day chasing goats and planting yams. You are wasting my precious time.
Nwando, beauty does not stay forever. One day, the men standing in line for you today may no longer return.
That day will never come. Men will always kneel before me. Now move aside before people think we belong together.
May life never teach you the lesson you refuse to learn from wisdom.
Save your prayers for yourself. A chief is waiting for me, not you.
Nwando was the kind of woman people talked about even before they saw her, because in the village of Amakwa, her beauty had become something like a story mothers told their daughters and young men whispered about under the moonlight. And from the time she was a little girl, people had always said that she was special, that her face was too fine for an ordinary life, that her eyes were bright like morning light, that her skin was smooth and glowing, that the way she walked made people stop what they were doing and turn to look again. And as she grew into a young woman, those words followed her everywhere until she began to believe them with all her heart. When she stepped out in the morning with a wrapper tied neatly around her waist and chest, beads on her neck and wrists, and her braided hair packed high and decorated with little beads that clicked softly as she moved, old women would shake their heads and smile. Young girls would stare at her with admiration, and men from Amakwa and from nearby villages would find excuses to pass by her father's compound just to catch a glimpse of her. And at first, Nwando enjoyed the attention quietly. But little by little, that joy became pride, and that pride became something hard and dangerous inside her. Her mother noticed the change first, because mothers often see what others clap for and know the danger hiding behind it. And one evening, while pounding yam in the open space behind their beautiful hut, she looked at Nwando, who was sitting and admiring the beads on her hands, and said quietly, "My daughter, beauty is a gift, but it is also a test, and if you do not carry it with wisdom, it will carry you into trouble." But Nwando laughed and replied, "Mother, why do you always speak like this when everyone is praising me? Can you not see that I am not made for just any man?" And her mother sighed deeply and said, "That is exactly what frightens me." Her father too, though gentler in speech, began to worry because he had seen many seasons and knew how quickly time moved. He was proud of his daughter, yes, but he wanted her to have a home of her own, children who would call her mother, and a husband who would stand beside her when life became hard. So, whenever a serious man came to ask for her hand, he would call Nwando aside and say, "Look well, my daughter. This one may not be the richest, but he is hardworking. Or, this one may not speak too much, but he respects elders and he would take care of a wife." Yet, Nwando always found something to mock. The first man she rejected was a young farmer with broad shoulders and a calm face, who came with his uncles carrying gifts and respect. And after they left, Nwando tossed her head and said, "A farmer, father? You want me to spend my life counting yams and listening to goats cry in the yard?" And when her mother asked, "What is wrong with honest work?" Nwando answered, "Nothing is wrong with it, but it is not for me." Not long after, a skilled hunter came, a brave man known for providing meat for his people and protecting his village from dangerous animals. But Nwando looked at him from head to toe and said to her friend later, "He smells of the forest and his hands are too rough. Am I supposed to marry a man whose life is only bush and blood?" Then a trader came from a nearby town, dressed well, polite and cheerful, and though he had a good name and owned many goods, Nwando dismissed him too. "He talks too much," she said with a sharp smile. "A husband should have more presence." Another man came, a quiet son of a respected elder, and Nwando complained that he was not handsome enough. Another came, and she said he laughed like an old man. Another came, and she said his compound was too small. Another came, and she said his mother looked troublesome. Every time someone asked for her hand, she acted as if they were insulting her for even trying. Sometimes she did not even wait for her parents to speak before she refused. And though her beauty was great, it was the pride in her voice that people carried away with them when they left. As the months turned to years, the stories changed. At first, people said, Nwando is waiting for the best. Later, they began to say, Nwando thinks no man is good enough. After that, they started laughing quietly and saying, let us see how long pride will cook food for her. Still, Nwando paid no attention. She would stand with other young women at festivals and watch men glance at her, and she would feel powerful. She believed the kind of man she deserved was not one who would come with simple gifts and family talk. In her mind, she was waiting for a wealthy chief, a man with land, servants, titles and wealth, a man whose name would make other women look at her with envy. And whenever her closest friend, who later married and started having children, warned her to be careful, Nwando would laugh and say, I am not in a race with anybody. Let those who want ordinary husbands run after them. I will wait for the kind of man that matches me. Her mother would hear such words and sometimes go inside the hut to cry quietly because she knew her daughter was building her life on a mirror instead of a foundation. Years passed in a way that felt slow while they were living it, but cruelly fast when they looked back. One by one, the men Nwando rejected married other women. The young farmer took a patient wife who worked beside him, and soon their compound was full of laughter and children. The hunter married a cheerful woman who respected him, and people praised the peace in their home. The trader married a woman from another village and built a larger compound. Even the quiet son of the respected elder found a wife who valued his character. Nwando watched all this and pretended not to care, but each marriage celebration was like a small thorn she pushed away during the day, only to feel at night. Still, she refused to bend. When her mother said, "My daughter, it is not too late," Nwando would answer, "Then stop acting as if I am old." When her father said, "Life is not lived with pride alone," she would say, "I know what I am doing." She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was no longer the only thing people saw. People began to see stubbornness, pride, and a kind of coldness that made even good men fear that she would never be satisfied. Her mother's health started failing, not because of one sickness alone, but because sorrow sat heavily on her heart. She worried about Nwando in the morning, in the afternoon, and at night. She worried when she saw young wives carrying babies on their backs. She worried when she saw Nwando still sitting like a queen in her father's compound, waiting for a dream that never seemed to come. One night, after a day of fever and weakness, her mother called Nwando to her sleeping mat and held her hand with trembling fingers. "Listen to me now," she said softly. "Do not let this life teach you by force what wisdom is already trying to teach you with love. A woman's beauty can open a door, but it cannot keep a home standing. Kindness, patience, respect, and humility do that. Please, my daughter, let your heart soften." Nwando felt uncomfortable hearing such serious words, and because she did not know how to face pain honestly, she answered with impatience, "Mother, rest now. You are speaking as if I have no future. I am still young." Her mother looked at her for a long moment, and there was sadness in her eyes deeper than Nwando could understand. Then she turned her face away. Not many months later, her mother died, and the day of the burial was the first time Nwando felt true fear touch her heart. Because as women wailed and her father sat in grief like a man whose strength had been cut down, Nwando suddenly understood that one voice that had always warned, prayed, and watched over her was gone forever. That night, she lay awake listening to the silence where her mother's breathing should have been, and for the first time, she whispered to herself, "Maybe I have delayed too long." But morning came, and pride returned like an old companion. She wiped her tears, tied her wrapper, and continued as before, though now the village had changed around her. The girls who once admired her were becoming wives, some already had babies, some had started sending their children on errands. Festivals no longer felt the same, because when people saw Nwando, their smiles carried pity. Some women greeted her kindly, but others looked at her with the sad satisfaction of people whose warnings had come true. Even her younger brother, who still respected her deeply, began to feel concern. One afternoon, he came home from the stream and found her sitting alone outside her hut, staring into space, and he said, "Sister, are you all right?" She answered sharply, "Why should I not be all right?" But he sat beside her and said, "I am only asking because you no longer laugh like before." Nwando looked away and said, "There is nothing to laugh about when everyone in this village thinks they know my life." Her brother hesitated, then spoke with care. "Maybe they do not know your life, but they can see your sadness." That simple truth pierced her more deeply than any insult, and for a moment she wanted to cry, but instead she stood up and went inside. After that day, Nwando began to notice things she had refused to see before. She noticed how empty evenings felt in her father's compound. She noticed how tired her father looked, how age was bending him little by little. She noticed that when people spoke of her now, they no longer spoke with excitement, but with concern. Most of all, she noticed the terrible sound of loneliness. It was there when she woke in the morning and had no child calling her mother. It was there when she helped cook and knew there was no husband returning from work to ask for water. It was there at weddings, naming ceremonies, and harvest feasts. Loneliness sat with her in every season, and slowly it began to break her pride from the inside. By the time Nwando reached 35, the truth had become too large to deny. She was still beautiful, yes, but she was no longer the untouchable young girl men traveled from villages to see. She had become a woman carrying regret in silence. She understood at last that life had moved while she stood still. Yet even then, she did not want to remain in Amakwa doing nothing while pity swallowed her whole. So, after many nights of thought, and after a long talk with her father, she decided to leave the village and go to Owama, where she had heard there was work in a busy palm wine bar. Her father did not want her to go at first. "A daughter should not suffer like this when she has a home," he said. But Nwando knelt before him and replied, "Father, let me go. I cannot continue sitting here waiting for time to return. Let me work. Let me at least do something with my life." Her father looked at her carefully and saw that something had changed. The arrogance was no longer blazing in her eyes the way it once did. In its place was weariness, sorrow, and a quiet determination. He lifted her up gently and said, "If you must go, go with wisdom, walk with dignity, and remember that no matter how far you travel, this is still your home." Nwando's eyes filled with tears. "Forgive me, father," she whispered. "For what?" he asked softly. She bowed her head and said, "For not listening sooner." Her father placed a hand on her head and said, "A child who understands her mistake has already taken the first step back to wisdom." Nando's younger brother helped prepare her things. He folded wrappers for her, packed beads and personal items carefully, and though he tried to be strong, sadness showed clearly on his face. "Will you be safe there?" he asked. "I will try." "And you will visit?" "When I can." "And if work is too hard, you will come home?" At that, Nwando smiled faintly and touched his cheek. "You speak like an old man." He answered, "Somebody has to worry for you." On the morning she left Amakwa, the sky was soft and pale, and the air carried the smell of earth and leaves. Nwando stood for a moment at the entrance of her father's compound and looked back at the beautiful huts, the trees, the paths she had walked since childhood, and the place where so many chances had come and gone. Her heart felt heavy, but there was also a small new feeling inside her, something she had not known in years. It was humility, and though it hurt, it also gave her a strange kind of peace. The journey to Owama was not too long, but to Nwando, it felt like crossing from one life into another. Owama was busier than Amakwa, with more traders, more travelers, more movement, more voices. And the palm wine bar where she found work stood near a road many people used. So from morning until night, there was almost always somebody coming in, somebody eating, somebody drinking, somebody calling for more food, more meat, more wine. The owner of the bar was a serious older woman who had heard of Nwando through a relation and agreed to take her in as a sales girl. On the first day, the woman looked her over and said, "Beauty will not do this work for you. Your hands must be quick, your mouth respectful, and your body strong." Nwando lowered her eyes and answered, "I am ready to learn." The woman nodded once and said, "Good, then start by sweeping." Years earlier, Nwando might have been insulted by such an instruction, but now she took the broom quietly and began. She swept the packed earth floor, wiped benches, carried pots, served food, and moved until her back ached and her feet burned. Before noon, her hands were already tired, and by evening, sweat had soaked her clothes, but she did not complain. She watched the older workers and copied them. She greeted customers with respect. She carried trays carefully. She learned how to move fast without spilling. The work was hard, far harder than the lazy life she had lived in her father's compound, and more than once, she had to step outside and breathe through the shame of remembering how proudly she had once spoken about ordinary work as if it was beneath her. That first evening, when men came in dusty from the road and called for food and fresh palm wine, Nwando served them quietly. Some looked at her with interest, some with the careless eyes of men who noticed any woman, and some did not notice her at all. And strangely, for the first time in many years, she did not mind. She was too tired to think about admiration. She only wanted to do her work well enough to keep it. When the last customers left and the night grew still, the owner counted the day's earnings and then handed Nwando a small amount of money. "This is not much, but if you work faithfully, your hands will not be empty." Nwando stared at the coins in her palm as if they were something holy. It was the first money she had truly earned by her own labor. Her eyes stung, and she quickly looked away so the woman would not see. Later, alone in the small room she rented in Owama, with her few things placed neatly in one corner, and the sounds of the village fading outside, Nwando sat on her mat and let the events of her life rise before her one after another. The suitor she mocked, her mother's warnings, her father's sadness, the laughter of other women's children, the empty years, the shame, the move, the hard work, the coins in her hand. At last she bent her head and wept, not loudly, not for show, but with the brokenness of a woman who had finally seen herself clearly. "Mother," she whispered into the quiet room, "I understand now." She cried for the years she could not bring back, for the wisdom she had rejected, for the life she had imagined and lost. Yet when the tears were finished, she wiped her face slowly and sat upright. Outside, night insects sang, and somewhere far off, people were still talking and laughing. But inside that little room, Nwando made a silent promise to herself that from that day forward, she would no longer live like a proud girl waiting for life to kneel before her. She would live as a woman who had been humbled, who had learned that time was precious, that work had dignity, and that the heart could still hope even after regret. And before lying down to sleep, she lifted her eyes to the dark roof above her and said softly, "If there is still a good future for me somewhere ahead, let me not destroy it with my own hands." And with that quiet prayer resting on her lips, Nwando closed her eyes in Owama for the first time, not as the proud beauty of Amakwa, who believed the world owed her everything, but as a lonely, wiser woman who had at last begun to understand the true cost of pride. By the time Nwando had spent some months in Owama, many things about her had changed, though anybody who looked at her would still see a beautiful woman with a fine face, bright eyes, smooth skin, and the natural grace that made people notice her even when she was trying not to be noticed. Because beauty had not left her, but the pride that used to sit on her face like a crown had been softened by work, silence, and regret, and every day she woke before the sun, swept the compound of the palm wine bar, washed pots, arranged calabashes, cut vegetables, served food, poured palm wine, and moved up and down until her body ached. And though the work was hard, she did it with patience because she no longer saw labor as something shameful. She had begun to understand that an empty hand had no right to mock an honest one. And slowly, the older woman who owned the bar began to trust her, while the customers too began to know her name, some greeting her with kindness, some trying to joke with her, some staring too much. But Nwando kept her distance from careless men and minded her work, because after all that life had taught her, she had become more careful with her heart, even though deep inside she still prayed that one day, somehow, she would not remain alone forever. The bar itself was always full of life, especially in the evening, when smoke from roasted meat rose into the air, voices mixed with laughter, palm wine flowed into waiting calabashes, and men from different villages sat on wooden benches to eat, drink, argue, and rest from the day. And it was during one of such evenings, when the crowd was busy and the setting sun was turning everything golden, that Nwando first truly noticed the man everybody respectfully moved aside for when he entered, because though she had seen him once or twice before from a distance, that day he came in with the quiet confidence of a man used to honor. And as he stepped into the bar, several men stood up to greet him, while others lowered their voices, and the owner quickly wiped a better seat for him, saying, "Welcome, Chief," with the careful respect people give a man of rank. And Nwando, carrying a tray of food, turned to look properly at him for the first time. Chief Ikechukwu was not a young man, but he carried himself with such strength and calm dignity that age seemed to increase his presence instead of reducing it. He was a handsome man in the full weight of manhood, broad in the shoulders, neat in appearance, with sharp eyes that saw much and revealed little. And though his wealth was clear from the quality of the wrappers he wore, the beads of title on his neck, and the way people honored him, there was no noise about him, no childish display, no drunken pride. And when the owner called Nwando and told her to serve him, she approached with care, placed the food before him, poured his drink, and said softly, "Welcome, sir." And he looked up, held her gaze for one small moment longer than expected, and answered in a deep, calm voice, "Thank you." And though the word was simple, the way he said it made it feel like a gentle hand on the air. After he finished eating, he left money on the tray, and when Nwando picked it up, she realized he had given far more than the cost of the food. So she quickly moved after him and said, "Sir, you gave too much." But he only smiled faintly and replied, "Keep the rest," before walking away. And she stood there for a moment staring at the coins in her hand, confused, surprised, and strangely unsettled. After that day, he began to come often, sometimes twice in 1 week, sometimes more, and each time he came, he sat with dignity, ate quietly, spoke respectfully, and left good money behind. He did not behave like some men who use generosity as a rope to drag women into foolishness. He did not call her carelessly, touch her without permission, or speak with dirty meaning. And that alone made him different from many of the men who passed through the bar. Because even in his kindness, there was control, and that control made him difficult for Nwando to understand. One evening, when the crowd had become lighter and the night breeze had started moving softly through the open space, he called her by name for the first time. "Nwando," he said, and she turned quickly, surprised. "Yes, sir," she asked. "Sit for a moment," he said, pointing to the empty bench opposite him. She hesitated at once. "I am working." "Then stand if you prefer," replied Nwando, not forcing her, "but answer me something. How long have you worked here?" Nwando looked at him carefully. "Some months." "And you are from Owama?" "No." "Then from where?" "Amakwa." He nodded slowly as if storing the answer in his mind, then asked, "Do you like it here?" Nwando gave a small, tired smile. "Like is a big word. I work here, that is enough." At that, a hint of amusement touched his face. "You speak like someone who has learnt life the hard way." She lowered her eyes. "Some people learn early, some learn late." He studied her quietly for a moment, then said, "Late learning is still learning." Before she could answer, another customer called for food, and she quickly moved away, but his words remained in her mind all night. Not long after that, he started asking about her in small, careful pieces, never too much at once, never in a way that felt rough. And slowly, he learned that she lived alone, that her mother was dead, that her father was old, that she had a brother in Amakwa, and that she had come to Owama to build something better for herself. But what he learned from others without Nwando knowing was much deeper than what she told him herself, because by then he had already made up his mind to know who she was. and men who have wealth and power rarely struggle to gather information. So before long, he knew of her beauty, her pride in earlier years, the many suitors she had rejected, the quiet shame that now followed her name, and the loneliness that had pushed her out of her father's compound into the hard life she now lived. Yet while Nwando was learning little pieces about him only from the respect people showed him and the careful way they addressed him as Chief Ikekuchu of his Singwa, there was much about him she did not know, because beyond the roads of Owama, beyond the bar, beyond the quiet kindness he showed her, Chief Ikekuchu had another life, a full life, a settled life in the village of his Singwa, where a large, beautiful compound stood under the shade of trees with clean swept earth, strong huts built with care, stores of wealth, servants, and a household that had long been respected in the area. And in that compound lived his wife Azuka, a graceful woman of deep beauty and dignity, and their 2 daughters, both lovely young women, both respectful and well-raised, both greatly loved by their parents. In truth, Chief Ikekuchu was not an unhappy husband wandering outside because his home was broken. No, he and Azuka shared the kind of marriage many envied, a marriage built over years of affection, respect, and understanding. And though they had known sorrow in some areas, they had also known peace, laughter, and real companionship. He listened to her, she stood with him, and together they had raised their daughters with care. Yet there was one wound in that home that had refused to close, and that wound was the pressure of people. For years, members of the chief's extended family had watched, whispered, advised, and demanded. At first, it came as small comments from old women and titled men. May the next one be a son. A man of your title must have a boy to stand after him. Daughters are blessings, yes, but a home like this needs a male heir. As the years passed and no son came, the comments became heavier. During meetings, older kinsmen would clear their throats and speak about family line, land, titles, inheritance, and future leadership. At ceremonies, some people would greet Azuka with smiles that carried hidden judgment. Even women who had no right to measure another woman's pain would sometimes say, "May God still remember you with a son," as if the daughters she had already born were not flesh of her flesh and joy of her joy. Azuka loved her daughters deeply. She never saw them as less. She dressed them with care, taught them respect, protected them, prayed over them, and held them close to her heart. But love for her daughters did not stop the pain those outside voices caused, because again and again she was reminded that in the eyes of tradition, in the eyes of old family expectations, in the eyes of those who watched Chief Ikekuchu's house with interest, a male child meant security, continuity, and power, and the absence of one meant danger. One evening, after a family gathering where an elderly uncle had spoken too boldly, the wound opened wider than before. The uncle, a hard-faced man who believed age gave him the right to wound others without kindness, had looked directly at Chief Ikekuchu before several men and said, "You are respected now, yes? But respect can move quickly when a man has no son to stand after him. Do not wait until another branch of this family begins to make plans over what you built with your hands." The room had gone quiet, and Chief Ikekuchu, though controlled, had felt the insult like a slap. Later that night, he returned home carrying the silence of a troubled man, and Azuka, who had already heard through women's talk what had happened, waited until the daughters had gone inside before approaching him in the outer room. "He spoke without shame," she said softly. Chief Ikekuchu exhaled heavily. "He spoke what others have been thinking." Azuka stood still for a moment, then asked in a voice already breaking, "So all these years, after all I have done in this house, after the daughters I gave you, I am still the woman who did not give you enough?" He looked at her at once and said, "Do not speak like that. You know that is not what I believe." "But it is what they believe," she replied, and tears gathered in her eyes. "And one day, what they believe may become what they do." He rose and moved closer. "Azuka." She stepped back, not from him, but from the pain. "Tell me the truth," she said. "Have you never feared it? Have you never feared that when you are gone, your land, your title, even this compound may be dragged into the hands of men who did not labor beside you because we have no son?" For the first time, he did not answer quickly. And that silence alone was answer enough. Azuka turned away and covered her face. "So, even in your heart, the fear is there." Chifikekwuchu moved to her then and held her shoulders gently. I am a man, Azuka. I know the world we live in. I know how families are. I know what greed can do. But do not think for a moment that I do not honor you or our daughters. Honor will not stop people from fighting over what belongs to your blood, she whispered. That night they spoke for a long time, not with anger, but with the sorrow of two people cornered by tradition, family expectation, and fear of the future. They spoke about heirs, about lineage, about the daughters they loved, about how unfair it was that joy in one area could be made to feel like failure in another. And slowly, painfully, the conversation moved towards a place neither of them had wanted to go. Azuka was the one who said it first, though she spoke like a person forcing poison past her own lips. If a son is what they will not stop demanding, then maybe a son must come. Chifikekwuchu stared at her. From where? She swallowed hard. From another woman. He turned away at once. No. Listen to me. I said no. And what then? She asked, suddenly trembling. Do we sit and wait until old men begin to plan around our daughters? Do we wait until cousins circle this house like hungry dogs? You are speaking from pain. I am speaking from fear. He paced a little, troubled, angry, ashamed that such words had entered their home. If I take another wife openly, they will celebrate it as if you are nothing. Azuka closed her eyes for a moment, then said the terrible thoughtfully. Then do not take her openly. He stopped moving and looked at her. What are you saying? She lifted her wet face and said, find a woman far from this village, a woman with no hold here, a woman who can give you children. If a son comes, the child will belong to this house, but she must not come here. She must not rise and take over the home I built with you. She must never stand above me. Let it be done quietly. For a long moment, the only sound between them was the crackle of a small lamp flame. Chifikekwuchu was too shocked to speak. Azuka went on, though every word cost her pride. I do not say this because my heart is wicked. I say it because this world is wicked. If I must swallow pain to protect what belongs to my children and your line, then I will swallow it. And what of the woman? He asked at last. What of her life? Azuka's voice weakened. She will be provided for. Provided for? He repeated with quiet disbelief. Is that enough for a human life? Azuka began to cry openly then. Nothing is enough. Nothing about this is clean, but fear has already entered this house. I do not know another road. They did not settle everything that night, but after that night, the thought remained between them. And once such thoughts settle in a troubled heart, they begin to grow roots. Days passed, then weeks, then more pressure came from family, then whispers, then another meeting, then another wound. And slowly, what had once seemed impossible began to look not right, but necessary. Chifikekwuchu fought against it in his heart because he was not a foolish, cruel man by nature, but fear of the future, pressure from tradition, and the cold, practical logic of inheritance kept pressing him. And while all this was happening, he kept seeing Nwando in Owama serving quietly, moving with tired grace, speaking less than before, carrying both beauty and vulnerability in a way that made her stand out from other women. She was not from his village. She had no husband. She was lonely. She wanted a home. She wanted to be chosen. The more he watched her, the more he saw not only a woman, but a path, and that was the beginning of the danger. Yet, because life is never simple, something more complicated also started happening inside him. The first plan had been practical and cold, but repeated nearness changes many things. And as he watched Nwando work hard, speak respectfully, and carry hidden sadness in her eyes, he began to feel pity for her first, then interest, then something warmer that he did not speak aloud. And this made everything worse, because a man can sometimes carry out a cruel act more easily when his heart is hard, but when feeling enters, the act becomes more dangerous, more confusing, more damaging to everyone involved. One evening, he stayed back after most people had left and asked her, "Do you never rest?" Nwando gave a tired laugh. "Rest is for people whose work is finished." "And is yours never finished?" "In this place?" she asked. "Never." He looked at her hands then and said, "Hard work has changed you." She answered without bitterness, Life changed me before work did. He nodded slowly. And if life offered you something better now, would you take it? Nwando looked at him carefully, searching his face for mockery, but found none. It depends on what better means, she said. A home, peace, respect, a husband who sees your worth. Her heart gave a small, frightened jump, but she kept her voice steady. Words can be sweet when they cost nothing. Chief Ikechukwu leaned forward slightly. And what if the speaker is ready to pay them with action? She did not answer at once. She simply looked down at the tray in her hand, then said quietly, "Then such a person should speak plainly." He rose to his feet and said, "I will." After that day, his visits changed. He brought gifts sometimes, but not in a cheap, showy way. A fine wrapper, beads, money sent through the owner to help her restock small personal things. He would ask if she had eaten. He would tell her to sit when the place was less busy. He spoke to her with patience. He did not rush her. He did not drag her with force. He slowly surrounded her with the feeling that she was seen, valued, and chosen. And for a woman who had spent years tasting regret and loneliness, such attention entered the heart like rain on dry ground. Even then, Nwando tried to guard herself. One night, alone in her room, she sat staring at a wrapper he had given her and whispered, "Do not be foolish again." But another voice inside her whispered back, "What if this is the future you prayed for?" Soon enough, he asked to see her outside the bar, and one late afternoon, beneath the shade of a tree where the path bent away from the noise of people, he spoke directly at last. "Nwando," he said, "I have not come to play with you. I have watched you. I have listened to you. I know you are not a child. I know life has taught you pain. That is why I speak with seriousness. I want you." She looked at him with her breath caught in her chest. He continued, "I want to build a life with you. I want you to be my wife." Her eyes filled at once, not because she was weak, but because those words had lived in the deepest hidden place of her heart for too long. Still, fear made her careful. "You are a chief," she said. "Men like you do not speak such words without shadows behind them." "Then let me remove the shadows," he answered. "I am ready to come to your people. I am ready to do what is right." "Your people know?" she asked. "They will know," he said, which was true in a twisted way, though not in the meaning she had. She swallowed and asked, "You are not speaking of keeping me hidden somewhere?" He looked straight at her and said, "I am speaking of marriage." Nwando's eyes closed briefly, as if she could hardly bear the hope rising in her. "Do not lie to me," she whispered. "I have already had enough sorrow in this life." At that, something uncomfortable moved in Chief Ikechukwu's chest, but he pushed it down and replied, "I am not playing with your life." That was the answer that broke the last of her resistance. She began to cry quietly, and he stepped closer, not touching her until she did not move away. Then he held her gently while she wept against him. And in that moment, Nwando felt as though the years of emptiness behind her were finally closing, as though her mother's grave, her father's sadness, her own regret, the mockery of the villagers, the lonely room in Owama, and the hard work of the bar had all been leading to this one mercy. She did not know that the arms around her carried both tenderness and deception. Once Nwando agreed, Chief Ikechukwu moved quickly, because men with plans fear delay. He visited Amakwa first with respectful words, greeting her father properly, bringing drinks and small gifts, and speaking with calm seriousness about his intention to marry Nwando. Her father, now older and slower, listened with mixed feelings. On one side was relief so deep it almost made his knees weak. On the other side was caution, because he knew her daughter had known disappointment, and he did not want her wounded again. "Marriage is not small talk," he said carefully. "A woman leaves her father's house once." "That is why I came with respect," Chief Ikechukwu answered. "I did not come to waste your time." Her father asked about his people, his home, and his background, and the chief answered with enough truth to sound solid and enough lies to hide what mattered. He gave the name of Isingwa, spoke of business, spoke of standing, spoke of family, and every answer came smoothly. Nwando's younger brother watched him with sharp eyes, but even he could find no clear fault in the visit. Afterward, when the chief had left, Nwando's father sat quietly for a long time and then said to his daughter, "If this is the man your life has waited for, then may he not come with tears." Nwando knelt and held her father's knees. "Father, I believe this is my time." He placed his old hand on her head and said, "Then may peace follow you." The hardest part of the chief's plan came next, and it was there that his wrongdoing became complete. Because to lie with words is one thing, but to build a full false family around a lie is another level of darkness. He traveled far enough from the places where his true identity was known and quietly gathered men willing to act as relatives for money. Some were poor, some were shameless, some did not ask many questions because silver closes many mouths. He gave them instructions carefully. He said, "You will speak little. You are my people. You came from far. You know the customs. Do not overdo anything." One man laughed and asked, "And if they ask how we are related?" Chief Ikechukwu answered coldly, "Then you say what I have already told you to say." They nodded, each seeing only the money, not the damage. At home in Isingwa, Azuka lived through those days with a restless heart. She had agreed to the plan, yes, but agreement did not remove pain. On the night before the bride price journey, she sat with Chief Ikechukwu in silence for a long time before saying, "Once this is done, there is no turning back." He did not answer. She looked at him and asked quietly, "Will she try to enter this house?" "No," he said, "I will handle it. And if she asks questions, I will handle them." Azuka stared at the lamp's flame. "I never thought my life would come to this." He looked at her then and saw the sorrow in her face. "Neither did I." "Do you pity her?" she asked suddenly. He hesitated. "I do." Azuka nodded slowly, pain tightening her mouth. "Then do not let pity become love." He said nothing, and that silence troubled her more than any spoken answer. The day of the bride price came bright and full of movement. Nwando was dressed beautifully, her wrappers neat, beads shining on her neck and wrists, her hair carefully arranged. And though she tried to remain calm, joy kept rising in her like song. Women surrounded her, smiling, adjusting her wrappers, praising her beauty and saying, "At last your day has come." Her father moved slowly but with visible emotion. Her brother stayed close. When Chief Ikechukwu arrived, with the men pretending to be his people, they carried themselves with enough seriousness to convince those who wanted to believe, and the formal greetings began. Drinks were presented, words were exchanged, laughter rose at the proper places. Nwando's father brought out the list, and where items were not physically presented, money was paid in their place. And because the sums were good, and the men acted with confidence, few suspicions rose strongly enough to stop the event. If anything felt strange, it was covered by the excitement of finally seeing Nwando married after so many years. Some women whispered, yes, but whispers have never stopped a ceremony once drums begin beating in people's hearts. Nwando remained inside for part of the rites as custom required, then came out at the proper moment, and when her eyes met Chief Ikechukwu's across the gathered people, she felt her heart swell with gratitude and relief so powerful she nearly cried again. Her father's face was wet when he blessed her. "Go with peace," he said. "May your new home not know sorrow." Her brother embraced her and whispered, "Be happy." Nwando smiled through tears. "I will." Everything she had longed for seemed to be opening before her at last. When the ceremony ended and the people ate, talked, and celebrated, Nwando felt as if the heavy stone that had sat on her life for years had finally rolled away. Even the memory of those she had rejected no longer burned with shame that day. It only felt like a long road that had ended here. Chief Ikechukwu did not take her to his main family compound after the ceremony. Instead, he told her gently that there were things to settle first, and that for a little while she would stay in a better place he had prepared for her in Owama, where she would be comfortable while he arranged the proper time for her full introduction into the wider household. Because she trusted him now, because the marriage rites had been done before her father and people, because joy makes many questions sleep, Nwando accepted this without fear. True to his word in that part at least, he rented a much better house for her in Owama, far better than the small room she had been managing before, and when she entered it for the first time, seeing the clean swept floor, the space, the stronger walls, the better roof, the sleeping area, the cooking space, and the small comforts he had put in place, she stood still in amazement. "This is for me?" she asked. "For you," he said. She turned slowly, her face full of wonder. "I have never lived in a place like this." "Then begin now," he replied. Nwando's eyes shone with tears. "You have changed my life." Once again, something uneasy moved in him, but he covered it and said, "You deserve peace." She moved around the house, touching things lightly, smiling to herself, laughing softly the way she had not laughed in years. And later that evening, when the sky darkened and a lamp was lit in the new home, she sat beside Chief Ikechukwu with her head resting lightly against his shoulder and said in a voice full of grateful peace, "I thought my life had passed me by. I thought maybe I had lost my chance forever. But now I see that what belongs to a person can still find them even after delay." Chief Ikechukwu looked ahead into the night and did not know how to answer a sentence so innocent. After a moment, he simply said, "Rest now. You have entered a new season." Nwando smiled and believed him completely. The next morning, she rose in that new house with a lightness in her spirit she had not known since girlhood. She arranged her wrappers neatly, swept the place carefully, thanked the older woman at the bar for all she had done, and though she did not leave work fully at once, she carried herself now with the quiet joy of a woman who believed she had finally been chosen, finally been settled, finally been lifted out of loneliness into honor. And when she thought of her father in Amakwa, she smiled because she knew his old heart would now rest more peacefully. And when she thought of her late mother, she whispered, "It came late, but it came." Not knowing that beneath the beauty of her new beginning lay a secret agreement, false witnesses, hidden family ties and promises built on deception, while she herself sat in that better house with a thankful heart, certain at last that her dream had finally come true. After Nwando entered the new house that Chief Ikechukwu had rented for her in Owama, her life began to look like the answer to every prayer she had whispered with tears in the lonely nights of her past, because for the first time in many years, she woke each morning with peace instead of shame sitting on her chest. And though she still worked less often at the bar for a little while, it was no longer with the sadness of a woman who felt forgotten by life, but with the quiet joy of someone who believed she had finally crossed from hardship into blessing. And whenever she swept the clean floor of the house, arranged her wrappers, cooked food, or sat waiting for Chief Ikechukwu to arrive, she carried herself with the soft happiness of a wife who believed her future had at last opened before her. She did not know that the same future she praised in her heart was standing on a hidden crack that would one day break beneath her feet. Chief Ikechukwu came often in those days, never allowing too much distance to grow between them, and when he was with her, he showed patience, tenderness, and careful attention, as if he truly wanted her to feel safe in his hands. And because he never starved her of affection, never allowed her room to lack money, and never made her feel like a burden, Nwando gave him all the trust in her heart that she had once wasted on pride and dreams. When he came in the evening after business, she welcomed him with food and water, and sometimes they sat outside in the cooling air while she asked small questions about the life ahead. And though she often longed to know more about his people and his village, his answers always came wrapped in calm delay, gentle enough not to alarm her, but vague enough to keep her at a distance from the truth. Not many months passed before Nwando discovered she was carrying his child, and when the signs first became clear to her, fear and joy rose together inside her because she had waited so long to be called wife that the thought of being called mother too felt almost too great to believe. And one evening when Chifikechukwu came to see her, she sat before him with trembling hands and said softly, "There's something I must tell you." And he looked at her with concern and asked, "What is it?" Nwando lowered her eyes, smiled through shyness, and whispered, "I am with child." And for one small moment he went still, not because he was unhappy, but because the words he had hoped for in secret had now become flesh and could no longer remain only a plan in his mind. Then he drew a deep breath, stood up, and pulled her gently to her feet. And Nwando, seeing his face brighten, began to laugh and cry at the same time as he held her and said, "You have brought me great joy." And she answered with tears in her eyes, "I prayed this child would come with peace." And he stroked her hair and replied, "It has come well." When he left her that night, he did not return to Isingwa like an ordinary man carrying ordinary news. He returned with a strange mixture in his chest, because though the pregnancy meant the cruel plan he and Azuka had once spoken in fear was moving forward, it also meant that the woman they had chosen from a distance was no longer just an idea to him, but someone whose smile, tears, hopes, and trust he had come to know. Azuka saw the news in his face before he spoke. "It has happened," she said quietly. He nodded, yes. She held on to the doorway beside her and closed her eyes for a moment, then asked, "How far along?" Enough for her to be sure. "And she is well?" "She is well." Azuka nodded slowly, but peace did not enter her face. Instead, a deep, troubled silence settled on her. At last she said, "Then what we feared and what we planned are no longer separate things." He did not answer. She looked at him and asked, "Do you pity her more now?" He said with tired honesty, "She is carrying my child." Azuka's eyes filled, not only with anger alone, but with the pain of a woman watching the consequence of her own desperate idea grow larger than she had imagined. "I asked for a son," she said bitterly, "and now every step toward that son feels like a knife." Chifikechukwu moved closer and said, "Do not think I do not feel the weight of it." "Wait?" she asked. "When she begins to dream, what then? When she begins to ask to come here, what then? When she looks at you with the trust of a wife, what then?" He had no full answer, so he said only, "We will take each step as it comes." Azuka turned away. That is what people say when they have already stepped into danger. Meanwhile, Nwando's pregnancy moved forward with all the ordinary hopes of an expecting mother. She sang to herself while sweeping, she touched her stomach alone and smiled at the future. She sent word to her father in Amakwa, and when the message reached him that his daughter was with child, the old man sat down heavily, covered his face, and thanked God that at least before his death, he would know his daughter had not remained empty all her days. Her younger brother came to visit her and found her glowing with quiet happiness. "So it is true," he said with a wide smile. Nwando laughed and touched her stomach. "It is true." He looked around the house and said, "Then your life has truly changed." "Yes," she replied, and there was wonder in her voice. "Sometimes I still wake and touch my mat to be sure it is not a dream." He laughed, but then his face grew thoughtful. "Have you seen his home yet?" Nwando's smile faded only a little. "Not yet. He says there are things to settle first." Her brother frowned slightly. "And his people?" "He says the time will come." "Soon?" She hesitated, then forced a smile. "He has done everything else he promised, has he not?" Her brother nodded slowly, yet something in him remained restless. But because he saw her happiness and did not want to wound it with suspicion, he let the matter pass and only said, "May all continue well." As the moons turned and the time of delivery came near, Nwando began to feel both fear and excitement. And when labor finally seized her one night like a wave tearing through her body, women were called, an experienced birth attendant came, fire was made, cloths were prepared, and Nwando screamed through the long, hard hours between pain and prayer, gripping the mat, sweating, crying, begging for relief, while the older women around her kept saying, "Push, daughter, push, do not fear. Every mother passes this road," and before dawn, the room was filled with the sharp first cry of a newborn child. And when the birth attendant lifted the baby and announced, "It is a boy," joy burst through the room like light. Nwando, weak and trembling, stretched out her arms and began to cry as the baby was placed against her chest. "My son," she whispered over and over, "my son." Word was sent to Chief Ikechiku at once, and when he arrived and saw the tiny boy wrapped and sleeping beside Nwando, something fierce and tender moved through him. He reached down and touched the child carefully, then looked at Nwando, who was smiling through exhaustion, and he said in a low, thick voice, "You have given me a son." Nwando laughed weakly. "So they say." He sat beside her and for a moment forgot every lie, every plan, every hidden path that had brought them there. He only saw a woman who had suffered to bring forth life and a child who carried his blood. "He will be called Uzo," he said after a while, and Nwando repeated the name softly with deep joy. "Uzo." She lifted the baby a little and whispered, "You came and turned pain into song." The days that followed were sweet for her. She nursed Uzo, watched him sleep, kissed his small fingers, and marveled at every breath he took. She sent word again to her father, who rejoiced so much that even those who had once pitied his household now said, "At last old age has seen some happiness." Her brother came again, carried the child with proud, awkward hands and smiled from ear to ear. "He looks strong," he said. Nwando answered, "He will be stronger than us all." Yet, even in the middle of her happiness, one desire kept growing quietly in her heart. She wanted to enter fully into her husband's world. She wanted her son to be known there, welcomed there, blessed there. More than that, she wanted to stop living like someone waiting outside a gate that had already been promised open. So, when her body recovered enough and days grew calmer, she began to ask questions more openly. One evening, while Uzo slept near them, she said, "He should know his father's people." Shivikecheku replied with a careful nod, "He will." "When?" she asked. "Soon." She studied his face. "You always say soon." He reached out and touched her hand. "These things must be done with order. But I am your wife." "Yes." "And he is your son." "Yes." "Then why must everything wait behind one curtain after another?" The question was simple, but it struck him hard because it was honest. He answered by drawing her close and saying, "Do not trouble your heart. Nothing will be denied." Nwando wanted to believe that, and because she loved him and had already built her peace on his promises, she let the question slip again. Uzo grew, laughed, crawled, fell, stood, and filled the house with the kind of joy only a child can bring. And as his small feet began moving around the room and his voice began shaping little sound, Nwando's heart became even more tied to the life she believed she had entered. Shivikecheku spent time with the boy, carried him, fed him little things, smiled when he reached out his arms, and in those moments he looked like nothing less than a proud father. But every return to Isingwa made the silent trouble between him and Azuka deeper, because now the child was no longer only an idea to be collected later. He was living somewhere else, growing each day, and love was beginning to move in more than one direction. Azuka heard about every stage. "He's walking now," the chief said once. Azuka's face tightened. "And she?" "She keeps asking when I will take them home." Azuka gave a hollow laugh. Home. The word stung them both. "You see," she continued, "that is how it begins. She will not remain in a waiting room forever." "I know." "Then you must think." "I am thinking." "No," Azuka said with pain sharpening her voice. "You are delaying, and delay is the mother of greater trouble." Still, the months passed, and in time, Nwando became pregnant again. This time, the news did not come to her with the same trembling uncertainty of the first pregnancy. It came with fuller joy, because now she already knew the shape of motherhood. She knew how it felt to hold a child and be changed forever by it. When she told Chief Ikechiku, he held hands, smiled, but there was strain beneath his smile that she did not fully understand. "Another child," she said happily. "Our house is growing." He nodded, "Yes." She touched his chest playfully and said, "Now, you cannot delay much longer. You will soon have a full army here." He forced a small laugh and replied, "Let us first welcome the one on the way." This second pregnancy drew Nwando even closer to the dream of entering his main household, because in her mind, everything was becoming fuller, stronger, and more serious. She was no longer just a woman he visited. She was the mother of his son and the carrier of another child. Surely, she thought, no husband would keep such a family hidden forever. So she asked more often, though still with gentleness. "Does your wife know of us?" she asked one night. "She knows," he replied. "And she said nothing? She is aware. Then why have I not met her?" He answered, "There is a proper time. Will she accept me?" His pause was only a second, but Nwando felt it. "It will be arranged." Arranged, she repeated with mild unease. Must a wife be arranged into her husband's home? He kissed her forehead and said, You think too much when your body needs rest. She wanted to press harder, but the child in her belly moved. She was tired and she had learned to quiet herself when fear threatened the happiness she was trying to preserve. The second labor came harder than the first. The pain gripped her so fiercely that more than once she thought she would break apart, and as the women around her urged her to hold on, she cried out for mercy, for strength, for her mother who was no longer alive, and for the child to come safely. And when at last the birth attendant lifted the baby and announced again, "It is a boy," the room erupted in cries of amazement and joy. Nwando, weak and drenched in sweat, laughed and sobbed at the same time. "Another son?" she whispered in disbelief. Another son. When Chief Ikechukwu heard, he closed his eyes and stood still for a long moment, because now the plan he and Azuka had feared and desired had reached its fullest shape. There were 2 boys, 2 sons, 2 heirs. When he arrived and looked down at the newborn lying beside Nwando and his older brother Uzo toddling nearby, joy and guilt battled so hard inside him that he could hardly breathe properly. Nwando smiled at him and said with quiet pride, "You asked life for 1 hand and he gave you 2. He bent and kissed her forehead. "You have done more than enough." The second child was named Eze, and Nwando embraced the name with delight. From that day, her heart became even more restless about moving into her husband's true home, because now she was the mother of 2 sons, and though she did not speak with pride of it, she felt deeply that such a thing could not remain hidden forever. Her questions became firmer. "Uzo is growing," she said one evening while the boys played on a mat. "Eze too will soon begin to know faces. How long will they know only this place?" Chief Ikechukwu answered with patience that was growing thinner under pressure. "I said I will handle it." "And I have waited," Nwando replied, trying to remain soft. "I have waited through 1 child and now 2. What exactly are we waiting for?" He looked away. "There are matters among elders." "Do these elders not know you have sons?" He turned back sharply. "Do not speak as if I am not doing anything." Nwando fell silent at once, wounded by the sudden edge in his tone, then said quietly, "I am not your enemy. I only want to stand where I belong." Chief Ikechukwu regretted his sharpness immediately and softened. "Forgive me, there is weight on me, that is all." "Then let me carry some of it as your wife," she whispered. He pulled her into his arms, and though he held her, he could not tell her the truth she deserved. When he returned to his singwa, the matter could no longer be delayed. Azuka listened to everything in silence. The second son, Nduando's increasing questions, the children growing, the risk of someone tracing something one day. Then she said with flat, tired firmness, "It is time." "For what?" he asked, though he knew. "For what we decided from the beginning." Chief Ikechukwu did not answer. Azuka's eyes hardened through pain. "Do not tell me now that your heart has become too soft. If you fail to act, all this evil we have already done will only grow larger and more useless. Do you think I do not know that? Then do not stand between decision and action." She drew a breath and continued more quietly. "If she keeps waiting, she will ask more. If the boys keep growing there, they will root there. If people keep seeing you go and come, tongues will one day tie paths together. End it now." Chief Ikechukwu sat down heavily. "And how?" Azuka answered without blinking, because she had already thought through every step. "Tell her you are finally taking her and the children to meet the family. Let her prepare with joy. Then choose a day she will leave the house for the market or some errand. Take the boys, bring them away. We move from this village house to the other place for a time. By the time she begins searching, nothing clear will remain." Chief Ikechukwu looked at her as if he were looking at both the wife he knew and a stranger grown out of fear. "You have hardened yourself." Azuka's voice broke, though her face remained set. "No, I am already broken. Hardened would be easier." The plan was made. It sat between them like a curse neither wanted to touch, and yet both had already shaped. When Chief Ikechukwu returned to Nwando, he came wearing a face of calm kindness, and one evening, after sharing a meal with her and the boys, he took her hand and said, "Prepare yourself." Nwando's heart leapt. "For what?" He smiled faintly. "After 4 market days, I will take you and the children to my place. It is time for you to meet the household." For a second, she only stared at him, not trusting her own ears. Then joy burst across her face so brightly that it almost wounded him to watch. "Truly?" she asked. "Truly." She covered her mouth with both hands and began to laugh with happiness. "At last," she whispered, "at last." She knelt and thanked God aloud. She kissed Uzo, then Eze, then looked at Chifikechukwu with shining eyes and said, "I knew you would not fail me." He forced himself to smile back. "Make ready." From that moment, Nwando moved through the days like a woman floating inside her own joy. She washed the best wrapper she owned, arranged the children's little clothes, planned gifts for the people she believed she was finally going to meet, and spoke lovingly about the journey as if the door of honor she had waited before for so long was finally opening wide. "I must buy things," she said. "I cannot go empty-handed." She listed items in her head: wrappers, little gifts, food for the road, things for the children, things for herself, things to show respect to the wife she had never met. She even worried about how to greet properly. "Should I kneel first?" she asked one evening with a shy smile. "Should I let the children go to her?" Chifikechukwu answered in short, careful words, because every sentence felt like a wound. "We will do what is proper." "And your daughters," she said. "I wonder if they will like the boys." He said only, "They will see them." Every answer he gave was another lie laid like cloth over a pit. On the morning chosen for the market trip, the air was bright and busy with ordinary village life, and Nwando woke before dawn with eager energy. She bathed the children, fed them, tied Eze to her back for a little while as she moved about, then later untied him and laid out the things she wanted to buy. "I must go early," she told Chifikechukwu, who had come and was sitting with the boys. "The market will be full." He nodded. "Go, I will stay with them." She smiled gratefully. "Thank you. Keep them safe for me. I will not stay too long, but there is much to buy." Uzo reached for her wrapper and complained, wanting to follow. Nwando bent, kissed his head and said, "No, my son. Today your father will stay with you. I am buying fine things for our journey." She lifted Eze, kissed him too, and handed him back. "Be good for me." Then she turned to Chifikechukwu and said again, almost laughing with excitement, "When I return, I will show you all I bought." He only said, "Go well." She tied her wrapper firmly, adjusted the basket she would carry, and left, walking with the quick, happy steps of a woman hurrying toward what she believed was the final beginning of her true family life. For a while after she left, Chifikechukwu remained seated, listening to the fading sound of her steps and the small noises of the boys. Uzo played near the doorway, Eze babbled on the mat. The house was full of innocent life. Then at last he stood. His movements became swift and controlled. He gathered the children, took what had to be taken, and left before the day grew older, before neighbors paid too much attention, before chance could bring interruption. And like that, the act they and Azuka had feared, planned, delayed, and justified was done. Hours later, when the sun had already begun to lean toward evening, Nwando returned from the market carrying far more than she had planned, because joy had loosened her caution. She had bought wrappers, small beads, food items, little things for the children, and gifts chosen with care. And as she approached the house, she was smiling to herself, imagining how she would lay everything out before Chifikechukwu, and how in only a few more days, she would finally step into the household that had so long remained a promise. But as soon as she reached the doorway, something in the silence touched her strangely. The house was too still. She entered and called lightly, "I am back," expecting Uzo's voice or Eze's restless cry or Chifikechiku's answer. Nothing came. She set down her things and called again, louder this time, "Uzo! Eze!" Still nothing. Her smile faded. She moved into the inner room. Empty. She checked the sleeping area. Empty. She stepped back outside. "Chief," she called, now with growing confusion. No answer. She looked around quickly, then searched behind the house, then inside again, as if people could appear by force if she looked hard enough. "Uzo," she shouted. "Eze!" Her voice rose. "Chifikechukwu!" The basket she had carried tipped, and some of the items spilled on the floor, but she did not even notice. She ran to the neighbor's side and asked breathlessly, "Did you see them? Did you see where my husband and children went?" The woman looked surprised. "No, I thought they were inside." Her heart began to hammer wildly. She rushed to another house. "Did anyone see my children?" Faces stared back with confusion, concern, and then alarm as her voice broke into panic. "My children are missing. My children are missing." She ran back to the house again, as though hoping it would change while she was away. But it remained empty, cruelly empty. And now fear hit her in full force. She began opening everything, checking corners, calling their names until her throat burned. "Uzo! Eze!" Then another thought struck her and she froze. Chief Ikechukwu was gone too. She stood in the middle of the room with her hands shaking, and suddenly the silence around her turned terrible. "No," she whispered. "No!" Then louder, "No!" She ran outside screaming, "Help me! Somebody help me! My children! My children!" People began gathering. Women came first, then men, then curious children held back by elders. Questions flew at her from all sides. "What happened? When did you leave? Who was here?" Nwando, trembling and breathless, answered through tears. "I left them with their father. I went to the market. I came back and they are gone. All of them are gone." A murmur passed through the crowd. Some men spread out to search paths. Some women entered the house and came back with faces gone pale. One older woman held Nwando's shoulders and said, "Calm down and tell us clearly. What village is your husband from? We can send people there." Nwando stared at her, blank with shock. He... "What village?" the woman repeated. "Where is his family house?" Nwando opened and closed her mouth, but no clear answer came. Another man stepped forward. "What is his father's name?" She swallowed hard. Nothing. "What kindred?" another asked. "Which compound? Who came for your bride price? Which road does he use most?" Each question struck her like a blow, because in that terrible moment, she realized with unbearable force that she knew almost nothing that could save her. She knew his name. She knew he was called Chief Ikechukwu. She knew he said he was from Isingwa. She knew he was wealthy. She knew he had promised and smiled and touched his sons with loving hands. But which house? Which people? Which true path? Which family? Which roots? Her knees weakened. "I do not know," she whispered. The older woman frowned in disbelief. "How can you not know where your husband comes from?" Nwando's face crumpled. "He said he would take me. He said..." Her words dissolved into sobbing. A younger man asked, "The men who came for your bride price, where are they from?" She looked around helplessly, as if one of the answers might be hiding in the crowd. "I do not know." "You do not know? They came with him, and you never asked?" At that, shame rose, even in the middle of terror, because every gap she had covered with trust was now opening like a wound before strangers. She sank to the ground and began beating her chest. "My children," she cried. "Bring me my children." Owama searched into the evening. Men followed paths, asked travelers, and checked places where a person might pass with children. Women held lamps and called. Some tried to comfort Nwando, others looked at her with troubled eyes. The older woman who owned the bar sat beside her later when darkness had fully fallen and said quietly, "Listen to me. We will keep searching, but you must gather your mind. You must remember everything, every word, every name, every road." Nwando shook like a leaf in storm. "He said he loved me. He said he would take me to his people. He said after 4 market days, he held them today. He held them." The woman's own eyes filled. Sometimes the hand that feeds also hides a knife. Nwando let out a cry so deep it seemed to tear through the whole night. Why would he take them from me? No one answered, because no answer would have been enough. Searchers returned one after another with nothing. No trace, no clear witness, no useful direction, only emptiness. And as the night deepened and the crowd around her thinned into small clusters of helpless faces, Nwando finally understood the full shape of the nightmare that had swallowed her day. The man she trusted had vanished. The sons she carried in pain were gone, and the world around her, though full of people, could not lead her to them because she herself had built her marriage on promises without roots. And there, in the doorway of the empty house, surrounded by the gifts she had bought for a journey that would never happen, Nwando collapsed into a grief so terrible that even those watching could only stand in silence, while her broken cries rose again and again into the Owama night, calling for Uzo, calling for Eze, calling for a husband who had disappeared like a lie at sunrise. The morning after Nwando returned to an empty house and discovered that both her sons had vanished with Chief Ikechukwu, She did not wake from sleep like an ordinary person, because true sleep had not even touched her eyes through the long dark night. She only rose from the place where grief had thrown her down and found that the pain was still there, sharp and cruel and fully alive, as if the night itself had done nothing except make her fear deeper. And when the first light entered the room and fell upon the wrappers, beads, and little gifts she had bought for the journey that was never meant to happen, she let out a cry so bitter that the woman from the next compound rushed in again and held her before she collapsed. And from that morning onward, Nwando's life broke into two parts forever: the life before her sons disappeared and the life after, because nothing that came after that day ever felt complete again. Owama did not leave her alone at first. Men still went out in twos and threes to ask travelers. Women still questioned traders, and messengers were sent toward places where strangers might have passed with children. But each day returned empty, and every empty day tore something more from Nwando's spirit. She stopped eating properly, stopped combing her hair with care, stopped noticing whether her wrappers were neat or not, and when people begged her to rest, she answered with the wild look of a mother whose mind had been tied to absent children and said, "How can I rest when my children do not know where I am?" The owner of the palm wine bar sat beside her one evening and said softly, "Daughter, crying without plan will kill you before news comes." And Nwando turned to her with swollen eyes and asked, "Then what plan should a mother have when the road itself has stolen her children?" The older woman took a deep breath and replied, "You must go back to your father. You must tell him all. A wound this large should not be carried alone." At first, Nwando resisted because shame was still burning beneath her grief. Shame that she trusted a man she did not truly know. Shame that she could not answer simple questions about the husband she claimed. Shame that the marriage her father had celebrated had left her with no road to follow when disaster came. But after another day of useless searching, after another night of screaming Uzo and Eze into the dark until her own voice frightened her, she agreed. And so, with no child on her back, no little hand in hers, and no joy in the bundle she carried, she returned to Amakwa, looking like the shadow of the woman who had once left that village with hope. Her father saw her from a distance and knew at once that something terrible had happened, because no woman returns to her father's house with such emptiness in her face unless life has struck her at the root. And before she could kneel or speak, the old man stood with shaking hands and said, "Where are the children?" That question alone broke what little strength she had left, and she fell before him crying, "Father, they took them from me. He took them from me." And her father sank down slowly, as if the ground itself had suddenly become too heavy to stand on. Her younger brother rushed in when he heard the cries, and the whole story spilled out between tears, gasps, and shame, from the lies, to the waiting, to the promise of a journey, to the market day, to the empty house. And when she finished, silence fell in the compound like a curse. Her brother was the first to speak, and his voice shook with anger. "He came into this house. He looked into our faces. He ate our food. He spoke to father as if he was a good man." Nwando beat her chest and cried, "I did not know. I did not know." Her father did not blame her with hard words, because his sorrow was too deep for shouting. He only said in a broken voice, "The world can forgive foolishness more easily than a mother forgives the loss of her children." And then he turned his face away and wept quietly, like an old tree cracking from the inside. From that day, Nwando became a traveler of pain. She could not sit still in Amakwa because every morning she woke with only one thought. Somewhere, Uzo was breathing. Somewhere, Eze was crying or laughing or sleeping. And if she remained in one place while they were out there beyond her reach, then she was failing them again. So after a little time at home, she began moving from village to village, asking everyone the same questions until her words became as familiar to strangers as her own name. "Have you seen two little boys traveling with a wealthy man? One is older, one is younger. Their names are Uzo and Eze. Their father is called Chief Ikechukwu. He's from... And there, her voice often faltered, because even then, the shame of not knowing enough would rise in her throat like dust. Some people pitied her and listened. Some called others to hear her story. Some shook their heads and said, "This world is wicked." Others were kind and offered her water, food, or a mat for the night. Others were impatient and waved her away, saying they had their own troubles. Some men tried to take advantage of her weakness, asking ugly questions or pretending they knew something just to make her follow them. But suffering had sharpened her caution, and though she once lived carelessly with her own pride, pain now taught her how to watch faces and step away from danger. In market after market, she moved like a woman carrying a fire nobody else could feel. And when she saw boys of similar age to her own, she would stop breathing for a moment before rushing closer, only for hope to collapse again when the face was wrong, or the child turned and it was not hers. Sometimes she came home after many days with cracked feet, dusty wrappers, and no news, and her father would ask, "Did you hear anything?" And she would simply shake her head and lie down in silence. But at dawn, she would rise again and leave, because staying still felt like betrayal. The seasons changed around her. Rain fell and stopped. The roads grew muddy and dried again. New children were born in other people's homes. Harvest came and went. Yet inside Nwando, time hardly moved. Her sons remained small in her mind, even as the real boys were growing elsewhere. She kept remembering the weight of them on her back, the smell of their skin, the way Uzo used to stretch his hands toward her, the way baby Eze's mouth moved in sleep, and she feared most the thought that they might forget her face before she found them. More than once, standing before a stranger after a long walk, she would suddenly begin describing them not as they were now, but as they had been when stolen, and when the person listening pointed out gently, "If years have passed, they will be bigger now," she would go quiet and realize that the children in her arms lived only in memory, while the children in the world had continued walking without her. Her beauty, the beauty that had once made the whole village turn and stare, slowly lost its power over her life. Not because she became ugly in one sudden way, but because sorrow and hardship are slow hands. They do not strike once and leave, they keep touching a person every day until change settles fully. The smooth softness of her face hardened a little under the sun. Her eyes, once proud and bright with self-belief, became deeper and sadder. The glow of ease left her skin. She grew thinner. Her steps became the steps of someone who moved for need, not display. Even the care she once gave to beads and hair no longer mattered much, unless she was going among people who might help, and she wanted not to look mad. And yet, strangely, as the outer beauty she had once worshipped lost its hold, something else began to grow in her that was stronger than beauty. Humility entered her words. Patience entered her movements. Compassion entered her eyes. She, who had once mocked ordinary people and ordinary lives, now sat among poor women at market and listened to their griefs. She shared food with children she found begging. If another mother complained of a sick child, Ndondo's face would soften with immediate care because she knew too well what it meant to fear for a child's life. Women who first met her through sorrow often found kindness in her without knowing the proud story behind her. One afternoon, she met a widow on the road carrying firewood and a feverish baby, and when the woman stumbled, Ndondo dropped her own bundle and helped lift the wood. "Thank you," she said weakly. "May you never know a mother's pain." Ndondo held the baby for her while she adjusted the load and answered with tears threatening in her eyes, "I already know it." The widow looked at her properly then and saw that this was not ordinary sadness. "Who hurt you?" she asked. Ndondo whispered, "A man I called husband." She did not tell the whole story. She did not need to. The widow only nodded sadly, because women often recognize pain even before they understand its full shape. Back in Amakwa, her father aged faster under the weight of helplessness. Every time Ndondo left, he watched her go with the look of a man who wanted to stop his child from walking into more sorrow, but knew that grief stronger than advice was driving her feet. One evening, after she returned empty again, he called her to sit beside him under the fading light and said, "Daughter, even when a person is drowning, the river has its own strength. Do not let this search swallow your own life." Ndondo answered without anger, only with tired truth. "Father, what is my life if my children are lost inside it?" The old man touched her hand and said, "You are still my child." At that, she began to cry softly, "And I failed as a mother." "No," he said firmly, though pain shook his voice. "The one who stole them failed as a father and as a man." Yet, even as he tried to comfort her, he could see the lesson he and her late mother had once wanted her to learn through gentler ways now being written across her life with iron. When he later took ill, Nwando tried to stay home more, but her mind never stayed still. She cooked for him, washed for him, and sat by him when fever held him. Yet, even while blowing on his hot face or mixing herbs, part of her remained listening for footsteps that might bring news of Uzo and Eze. Before he died, he called her and her brother close. His voice had become weak, but his mind was clear. Looking at Nwando with love and sorrow mixed together, he said, "My daughter, your beauty made you proud. Pride delayed your wisdom, and lies found you when your heart was desperate. But hear me now. Do not let pain turn you bitter too. A bitter heart cannot carry truth when it finally comes." Nwando pressed her face against his hand and wept. "Father, forgive me for all I did not understand in time." He managed a faint, sad smile. A child asks for forgiveness before the end because her heart is still alive. That is good. Then he placed his blessing on her and on her brother, and not long after, he died, leaving Nwando with a grief layered upon grief, because now the house that had once held father, mother, daughter, warning, and hope felt emptier than ever. Yet even death did not stop her search. If anything, it made her cling more tightly to the thought that she must find her sons before all the voices that once loved her were gone from the earth. While Nwando walked the roads of many villages with dust on her feet and sorrow in her chest, another life was growing in a very different way far from her reach. In Chief Ikechukwu's household, Uzo and Eze were raised with hunger or neglect. They wore clean wrappers as children, were fed well, protected from illness, and given the kind of care that comes from a wealthy home where needs are met before cries grow too loud. Azuka held them, bathed them, sang them to sleep, corrected them, and watched over them with the fierce attentiveness of a mother. And in time, the boys came to know her touch, her smell, her voice, and her face as the natural shape of motherhood. To them, she was simply their mother. They never had reason to doubt it because no one around them spoke differently. The daughters, who were older, at first looked upon the boys with curiosity and some confusion, because even children can sense when adults are standing over truths they do not want to name. But as the years passed, the boys became part of the household rhythm, and the girls grew to love them as younger brothers. The compound, once quiet with only daughters passing through it, now echoed with the running feet and laughter of boys, and those who had once whispered about male heirs now smiled with satisfaction, as if they had never forced pain into anyone's heart to reach this point. Yet the peace in that compound was never complete. Azuka truly loved the boys, but love did not wash away guilt. In fact, it deepened it, because the more she tied wrappers around them, wiped their tears, cleaned their wounds, laughed at their childish talk, and watched them sleep, the more clearly she knew that somewhere another mother had given her blood, pain, and milk for these same children before they were taken away. Sometimes, when Eze fell sick and she stayed awake all night beside him, she would stare at his face in the lamplight and whisper to herself, "This child is innocent. This child did not choose the road that brought him here." And at other times, when Uzo, a little older and stronger, ran into her arms shouting "Mother," the word would enter her joy and break it at the same time. Chief Ikechukwu noticed these moments, because guilt had not left him either. He provided, he guided, he taught the boys as they grew. He watched them wrestle in the yard, listened to their questions, and more than once felt pride rise in him at the strength, intelligence, and courage showing in them. Yet every pride carried a shadow, because in every laughter-filled moment, he knew he had built that scene by tearing it away from another mother. He did not speak of this openly to Azuka often, because both of them already knew the shape of the wound they carried, but sometimes silence itself became too heavy. One night, after the children had slept and the compound had gone quiet, Azuka said without looking at him, "Uzo asked today why I do not have his baby marks on my stomach like some mothers joke about." Chief Ikechukwu turned his head slowly. "What did you say?" I laughed and told him children asked too many questions. She paused, then added, "One day laughter will not be enough." He sat down heavily. "Must we dig this wound every night?" Azuka's voice was not angry, only tired. "The wound digs itself. I do not need to touch it." Another time, when Eze fell and split the skin near his knee and cried for long, Azuka carried him, cleaned the blood, held him against her chest until he slept, then later went into her room alone and cried in silence because she remembered too clearly that she had once been willing to think of these boys as only heirs to secure a household. But now they had become flesh of her daily love. Chifakechukwu found her there and asked softly, "Why are you crying?" She answered without lifting her face, "Because I love them. And because I love them, I know more clearly what we did." He had no comfort strong enough for that truth. The years kept moving. Uzo grew into a sharp, observant boy with a quick mind and steady courage, the kind of child who watched adults closely and remembered more than they thought. Eze grew lively, warm, and more openly expressive, often saying what he felt before thinking of how it sounded. Together, they filled the house with life. They chased each other through the compound. They asked endless questions. They learned to greet elders properly, to sit and listen during family talk, to respect their sisters, and to follow their father with bright, eager eyes when he returned from journeys. But destiny has its own quiet work, and no lie remains perfectly sealed forever, especially when too many hearts must carry it. From time to time, a stranger passing through a market would speak of a wandering woman still asking after 2 lost sons and a chief named Akechukwu, and such stories would travel like smoke, thin and hard to hold, never enough to expose the truth fully, but enough to trouble those who heard. The first time such talk reached Isingwa through an older trader, Chief Akechukwu felt the blood in his body run cold, though he kept his face still. The trader, not knowing anything beyond gossip, only laughed and said, "There is some woman in another area who has been asking for years about sons taken by a wealthy man. The world is full of stories." Chief Akechukwu answered lightly, but inside him something tightened, because what he had hoped time would bury was still walking. Later, he told Azuka, and her face lost color. "Yes," she repeated quietly. "She's still searching?" "So it seems." Azuka sat down. "Then the earth itself refuses to help us hide it." The boys, of course, knew nothing. To them, the world was still arranged in simple truths. Their mother was Azuka, their father was Chief Ikechukwu. Their home was the compound in Isingwa, and their place in the household was natural and secure. Yet, even without knowing, they sometimes carried signs that the buried past was staring beneath them. Uzo once asked his father, "Why do some people say I look unlike you when others say I look exactly like you?" Chief Ikechukwu answered, "People speak because mouths were made to speak," and also accepted that for the moment. But it was the kind of question that shows how the mind begins reaching past easy answers. Eze once asked Azuka why some old women in distant places looked at him strangely and touched his face as if trying to remember something. Azuka smiled and said, "Because you are handsome and people are foolish." And Eze laughed. But after he ran away, she sat still for a long time, hearing in that innocent question the footsteps of a future she feared. Even the daughters noticed things. One evening, the older daughter, now grown enough to read the tension adults hide, said quietly to Azuka while helping arrange food, "Mother, sometimes when people praise the boys, you look happy and sad at the same time." Azuka nearly dropped the bowl in her hand. "Do I?" "Yes," the girl hesitated, then added, "If there is a pain in this house we do not know, it has not truly left just because nobody names it." Azuka looked at her daughter with startled sorrow and said only, "Some things are heavier than young people should carry." But in her heart, she knew the girl had spoken wisely. Outside that wealthy compound, Nwando's life was still a road. She did not stop searching even when her body begged for rest. Though with time, the search changed shape. She no longer ran like a woman newly wounded from one compound to another with wild hope that the next answer would bring immediate reunion. Years taught her that such answers rarely come quickly. Instead, she learned to gather bits of speech, watch faces, listen deeply, and follow even the smallest rumor with care. She learned which traders moved between many villages and might hear things. She learned which gatherings of elders drew news from far away. She learned how to sit quietly beside women pounding yam or selling vegetables and gently open conversations that might lead somewhere. Her questions became slower, wiser, and more precise, but the ache behind them never changed. Once, in a farm market, an old birth attendant who heard her story held her hands while saying, "A mother's cry does not disappear. It hangs in the air until the right ears hear it." Nwando asked, "How long must the air carry mine?" the old woman answered, until truth grows tired of hiding. Those words stayed with her. Another time, she shared a fire with travelers, and one man mentioned a wealthy chief with strong young sons in a place not near there. And though he could not give a clear name, Nwando's whole body went cold with attention. She asked too many questions too quickly and frightened the man into uncertainty. But after he slept, she lay awake staring at the darkness and whispering to herself, "Are you near? Are you near?" The next morning, the trail dissolved into nothing again. Yet even that small spark was enough to keep her moving. People who first saw her saw only a woman marked by hardship, but those who came to know her over time began to respect her. She was no longer the proud beauty of Amakwa. She had become something stronger and sadder. A woman tested by loss and softened by suffering. A woman who could comfort others while carrying her own emptiness. A woman who could sit beside a grieving person and understand silence. Children came to her easily because pain had removed harshness from her voice. Women trusted her because she listened without quick judgment. Elders, even when they could not help her, often blessed her because they sensed that her road was not ordinary. Her younger brother became her steady support, even after building his own responsibilities. Whenever she returned home, he made sure she ate, asked few questions when her face showed exhaustion, and said often, "One day this road will answer you." Nwando wanted to believe him, yet there were nights when hope seemed thinner than smoke. On such nights, she would sit outside under the stars and speak to the absent children as if they could hear her across distance. "Uzo, do you still laugh loudly? Eze, do you still sleep with your hand near your mouth? My sons, if you have forgotten me, may your bodies remember me somehow. May blood remember blood." Then she would cry quietly and go inside before dawn, because another day of searching always waited. In Isingwa, the boys kept growing towards manhood, and with growth came more movement beyond the compound. They followed traders sometimes, went to nearby places with trusted men, learned to observe markets and goods, and began to step slowly into the wider world. Each such step made Azuka's heart beat harder, because the wider the world became for them, the closer chance came to the edges of the truth. One evening, after the boys had returned from a short trip full of excited stories, Azuka sat with Chief Ikechukwu and said, "We cannot watch every road forever." He answered heavily, "I know." "Then what happens when one road watches them?" He did not answer because he had begun to fear the same thing. Truth was no longer something hidden in their hearts. It had become a presence moving outside them, patient and unseen, waiting for the right meeting, the right word, the right market day. And though neither Nwando or the household in Isingwa could yet see how close the threads were drawing, destiny had already begun its quiet work. In one place, a mother was still walking with grief and stubborn hope. In another place, two sons were growing under borrowed certainty. In the middle stood a man and a woman who had built part of their peace on another woman's tears and now lived each year with the fear that the past they had stolen from would one day stand upright before them. And so the years moved on, not empty and not silent, but heavy with waiting, because some stories do not end when people choose silence. They only grow underground until the day truth, tired of being buried, begins to push its way back towards the light. The day truth finally rose from the ground and began to walk openly toward every person who had once tried to bury it, started like an ordinary day. With sunlight spreading gently over the roads, traders setting out with loads on their heads and shoulders, women arranging goods in the market, and men speaking of prices, journeys, and weather. And in another part of the land, Uzo and Eze, no longer the helpless little boys taken from their mother's side, but now strong young men stepping fully into manhood, prepared to travel with other traders on a business journey that would take them through several places their father's trade often touched. And to them, it was only another road, another market, another chance to learn, bargain, and return with stories and experience, because neither of them knew that among all the villages waiting beyond that day's walk stood one place tied to their blood in a way they had never imagined. Uzo, who was more observant and measured, checked the goods twice before leaving and told Eze, "Do not talk too quickly when older traders are speaking. Listen first." And Eze laughed and replied, "You always talk as if you were born an elder." And Uzo gave him a small smile and said, "And you always talk as if silence will kill you." and their easy laughter moved through the compound, while Azuka watched them with that mixture of pride and quiet fear that had become part of her motherhood. Because every time they left the house for a farther journey, something cold passed through her heart, and though she could not explain it in a way that sounded reasonable, it felt to her as if roads had begun to whisper among themselves, passing along secrets, waiting for the right day to return them. Before the boys left, she adjusted Eze's wrapper with the same care she had shown when he was a child and said, "Do not eat carelessly on the road." And he grinned, "Mother, I am not a child." But then he bent for her blessing all the same, and Uzo came too, calmer as always, and Azuka placed a hand on each head and whispered, "Go and return with peace." And Chief Ikechukwu, standing beside her, told them, "Carry yourselves well. Remember whose house you come from." And Uzo nodded with firm respect, while Eze said, "We will not bring shame." And then they were gone, walking away with the confidence of young men who believed the world ahead belonged to them. The journey led them at last toward Owama, the very place where their story had been torn in two before they were old enough to remember it. And when they entered the market there with other traders, nothing in their faces showed recognition because memory had no picture stored there. To them, it was only another busy place full of voices, smoke, bargaining, movement, and heat. But for Destiny, it was the meeting point it had been preparing in silence for years. In that same market, older now and slower in body, but still sharp in memory, sat the traditional birth attendant who had once helped bring Uzo and later Eze into the world in Nwando's rented house before both boys were stolen away. And age had bent her back a little and silvered her hair, but it had not weakened the eye with which she remembered births, scars, and faces. Because women who spend their lives helping life enter the world often remember children in ways others do not. And on that day, while arranging some herbs and speaking to a younger woman beside her, she looked up casually and saw two young men passing among the traders. And at first, her body reacted before her mind did, with a sudden stillness so complete that the younger woman beside her asked, "Mother, what is it?" But the old birth attendant did not answer because she was staring hard now, her old eyes narrowing, her memory opening like a door long shut. And in the taller one, she saw something so familiar that her breath caught painfully in her chest. Not only the shape of his face, but the turn of his neck, the line of his jaw, the expression around his eyes. And then, as he shifted the load on his shoulder, the cloth near his upper arm loosened slightly, and she glimpsed a mark on his skin, a birthmark she knew too well because she had been the first outside her mother to see it clearly on the day he was born. Her hand shook, and she whispered, "No, no," then stronger, "It is him." The younger woman beside her looked confused. "Who?" The old birth attendant rose with surprising force for her age and took a few hurried steps forward, peering again. And now the second young man turned too, and though his face had changed with years, she saw in him the shadow of the baby she had once wrapped and handed to a crying mother. And the truth hit her fully. "Those are Nwando's sons," she said with trembling certainty. The younger woman stared at her. "The sons that were taken?" The old woman's eyes filled at once. "Yes, the same ones, the same blood. I would know them if the whole world stood between us." She did not waste another moment. Turning to a boy nearby, she said urgently, "Run, run now. Go and call Nwando. Tell her the old birth attendant says she must come to Owama market at once. Tell her the boys are here. Run!" The boy, startled by the fire in her voice, ran without question, and as he disappeared down the path, the old woman stood gripping her wrapper tightly, afraid that if she blinked, the young men would vanish again. Uzo and Eze, not knowing anything, continued with their trading business, speaking with other men, inspecting goods, listening to prices, and moving through the market as ordinary travelers, while the old birth attendant watched every step with the hunger of someone guarding a miracle from escape, and a few women near her began to whisper because the look on her face was not ordinary. Meanwhile, When the message reached Nwando, she was not in a market or on a road that day, but near home, helping another woman prepare food for a small ceremony. And when the breathless boy arrived and shouted, "Mother says come quickly, the old birth attendant says your sons are in a woman market," the spoon fell from Nwando's hand before she even fully understood the sentence. And for one heartbeat, she stood frozen as if her body feared hope too much to move. Then she seized the boy's shoulders and cried, "What did you say?" The boy, panting, repeated, "She says your sons are there, come quickly." And Nwando's whole face changed. The years of pain, dust, disappointment and waiting seemed to crack open all at once under one wild burst of hope, so fierce it nearly made her faint. And without another word, she turned and ran, not as a careful older woman who had learned patience through suffering, but as the mother she had always remained beneath every layer of hardship. And those who saw her on the road later said she moved like a person chased by death and pulled by life. By the time she reached the Wama market, breathless, sweating, trembling, and half afraid she would wake and find it was another cruel rumor, the old birth attendant was still watching the young men from a distance. And when she saw Nwando pushing through people with shaking hands and desperate eyes, she pointed at them and whispered with tears already running down her face, there they are." Nwando followed the direction of the pointing hand, and the world around her went strangely quiet, not because the market had stopped making noise, but because everything else fell away inside her. She saw them, two young men, one slightly taller, steadier, more watchful, the other more open in movement, quicker in expression. Her heart knew before her mind could catch up. Her blood knew. Her bones knew. Every sleepless night, every prayer, every road, every cry of Uzo and Ize into empty darkness, every memory held against despair, all of it came rushing into that one moment. And Nwando let out a broken sound that was not quite a laugh and not quite a sob, and began stumbling toward them. And the old birth attendant hurried beside her, saying, "Careful, careful." But there was no carefulness left in Nwando, only years of buried motherhood exploding into the light. "Uzo! Eze!" Both young men turned sharply at the sound of their names on a stranger's mouth, and before they could fully react, Nwando was before them, tears flooding her face, hands stretched out, shaking from head to foot. My sons! I found you! I found you!" Then she reached for them, trying to hold their faces, their shoulders, their arms, as if touch alone could prove what words could not. But the boys stepped back at once in confusion. Uzo frowned and said, "Mother, who are you?" And Eze, startled and uneasy, said, "Why are you calling us like that?" Nwando looked from one to the other, her smile breaking under fresh tears. "It is me! It is your mother! I am your mother!" The word hit them like nonsense. Uzo's face hardened in caution. "Our mother is at home. You are mistaken." "No," Nwando cried. "No, I am not mistaken. Uzo, you were born first. You had this mark here." She pointed with trembling fingers toward the place she remembered, and Uzo instinctively stepped back further, disturbed by how specific she sounded. "Eze, you came after him. I carried you both. I searched for you. I have searched for years." Eze looked at Uzo, then at the crowd that had begun to gather, embarrassment and uncomfort rising in him. "This woman is not well," he muttered. "Mother says some people will lie because father has wealth." Those words pierced Nwando like a spear. "No," she cried, almost choking. "I am not lying. I am the one who carried you in pain. I am the one who lost you. Ask her." She grabbed the old birth attendant's arm. "Tell them." The old woman stepped forward, voice trembling with age and emotion. "I was there when both of you were born. I cut the cord. I washed you. I handed you to this woman. She is speaking truth." The crowd gasped and murmured. Uzo's face tightened, not because he believed, but because now the scene had become stranger and more dangerous. "Enough," he said firmly. "Whatever this is, we want no part of it." Nwando stared at him in disbelief. "You want no part of me?" Her voice cracked so deeply that even strangers lowered their eyes. "I have walked half my life looking for you." Eze, more shaken than he wanted to show, said, "Please, do not cause trouble for us. We do not know you." At that, Nwando tried once more to step forward, but Uzo lifted a hand and stopped her with respectful distance rather than cruelty. "Do not touch us." And though he spoke calmly, the words tore through her. Nwando's legs nearly failed under her, she whispered. "You do not know me because I was stolen from you, not because I am a stranger." The old vet attendant began crying openly, and the market crowd swelled with whispers and questions. But Uzo, feeling a danger he could not yet name, said to Eze, "We are leaving," and the two brothers began moving away with the other traders, casting uneasy looks behind them, while Nwando stumbled after them, crying their names. "Uzo, Eze, my sons, do not leave me again." It was the old vet attendant who caught Nwando before she collapsed fully. "Daughter, hold yourself," she said through tears. "Truth has touched them, even if they do not know it yet." But Nwando's cried out they shook Owama like the echo of all the years she had carried in silence. News of the market scene spread with unnatural speed, because markets are mouths with many tongues, and before that day ended, people were already carrying versions of the story towards Amakwa, towards nearby villages, and towards roads that led eventually to Isingwa. But destiny had more than one witness prepared. Not many days after the market encounter, in a distant place where he had been living out the tired remains of a life held together by old compromises, one of the men Chief Ikechiku had paid years earlier to pretend to be his relative during the false bride price ceremony, fell gravely ill. He had grown old, and sickness had weakened him so much that even lying down seemed to cost him strength. And when people around him saw how near death he had come, he began to fear not his body's ending alone, but the judgment of the truth he had carried in silence for too long. Again and again he muttered in fever, "I must speak, I must speak." Until one elder from his own area leaned close and asked, "Speak what?" The old man wept and said, "The marriage, the false marriage, the woman whose children were taken." At first, they thought he was wandering in sickness, but as he repeated names more clearly, Chief Ikechuku, Nwando, the bride price, the money, the false relatives, those listening realized this was no fever dream. Word was sent quickly for trusted men to gather, because a dying confession carries weight, and before the man's strength fully left him, he told everything. How Chief Ikechuku had found poor men willing to act as family, how money had exchanged hands, how they were instructed to say little, how they went to Amakwa as false kin, how the bride rites were performed in deception, and how afterward he had tried to forget the matter until old age and fear of judgment made forgetting impossible. We were paid to wear another man's truth, paid to stand where we had no right to stand. That woman was deceived. Her father was deceived. Everything was a lie. Men listening to him stared in horror, and one said, "Do you know what you are saying?" The old man answered with desperation, "I know too late. That is why I must say it now." By the time he died, the confession had already begun moving like fire through dry grass. Amakwa heard, Owama heard, then Isingwa heard. The market encounter was one thing. A public birth-dead confession from one of the fake bride price witnesses was another. Together they struck like thunder. The matter could no longer be held in private talk or hidden behind family walls. Too many names were now tied together. Too many witnesses were speaking. Too many questions were rising. And because the story involved a respected chief, a woman from another village, stolen sons, false marriage rites, and public shame that touched not just one house but two communities, the elders could not allow it to remain loose among gossiping mouths. A council had to be called. Messengers went out, summonses were sent. Titled men from Amakwa and Isingwa were called to gather. Those who had seen the market scene, the old birth attendant, Nwando herself, her brother, respected elders from her people, and finally Chief Ikechuku and Azuka were all required to appear. The day of the council drew crowds before it even began, because people knew this was no ordinary dispute over land or insult. This was the opening of a wound years old, and every village wanted to know how deeply the rot reached. Under the wide shade where great matters were judged, the elders sat in order, grave and silent, while men and women stood around in thick, anxious circles. Nwando came dressed simply, not like a woman trying to impress, but like one carrying years of sorrow into the place where truth might at last receive a voice. Her brother walked beside her, face set hard with controlled anger. The old birth attendant came too, slower now, helped by younger hands, but with her memory burning bright. When Chief Akechukwu arrived with Azuka, a murmur moved through the gathering, because the sight of them together made the hidden thing suddenly visible. Azuka's face was pale and tense. Chief Ikechukwu's expression was controlled, but only from the outside, because inside him, the years of fear had finally taken shape before his eyes. The eldest elder opened the matter with solemn words. "We are not here for gossip," he said. "We are here because truth has forced its way into the open and now demands judgment. Let no one speak falsely. Let no one hide what must be revealed." He turned first to Nwando. "Woman, speak what happened to you from the beginning." And Nwando spoke. She spoke of her marriage, her trust, her children, the repeated delays, the promise to be taken into the household after 4 market days, the market trip, the empty house, the years of searching, the road, the tears, the market encounter with her sons, and as she spoke, there was no pride left in her voice at all. Only truth sharpened by pain, and more than once people in the crowd wiped their eyes because suffering spoken plainly often carries more power than loud performance. When she finished, the elder turned to the old birth attendant. "You say you know these boys?" The old woman answered, "I know them as surely as I know the hands that bore them. I was there when both entered this world. I saw the first mark on the elder one's body. I placed both children on this woman's chest." She pointed at Nwando. "I am old, but I am not blind in memory." Then the elder turned to witnesses from the market, and they confirmed the scene. He turned to the men who carried the birth-dead confession, and they repeated the words of the old false relative before all. Murmurs rose louder now, and eyes turned toward Chief Ikechukwu. The elder's voice deepened. "Chief Ikechukwu, many words have now come together against you. Speak." For the first time in many years, there was no path left for half-truth, no careful delay, no gentle excuse, no hidden road. Chief Ikechukwu sat in silence for a long moment while all eyes pressed upon him. Then he lowered his head, and the sight of that alone sent a visible ripple through the crowd, because powerful men do not bow easily unless something greater than power is standing over them. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost its old ease. "It is true," he said. Gasps arose immediately, but he continued. "The marriage was arranged in deceit. The men who came as my people were not my people. I had already been married to Azuka. We had daughters. We had no son. Family pressure became a poison in our house. Fear grew. We made a wicked plan." His words fell like stones into water. Nwando closed her eyes as if hearing the truth from his own mouth hurt almost more than all the years of suspicion. Chief Ikechukwu continued, each sentence exposing another layer. "I met Nwando in Owama. I chose her. At first I told myself it was for an heir, only for an heir, but I lied to her. I promised her marriage and gave her false marriage. She bore me 2 sons. I kept delaying, and when the boys came, fear of the truth becoming known grew greater. So I told her I would finally take her into the family. Instead, while she went to market, I took the children and disappeared." The crowd erupted then in outrage, disbelief, curses and cries, and the elders had to call for silence several times before order returned. The elder then turned slowly to Azuka. "And you? What part did you play?" Azuka, who had been holding herself together with visible effort, suddenly broke under the weight of the moment. Tears spilled down her face as she rose and spoke in a shaking voice. "I knew, I agreed. The fear of losing our household, our line, our inheritance entered my heart and turned me into something I never thought I could become. I loved my daughters, but I feared the pressure around us. I feared what family might do if there was no son. I told myself another woman would only bear the child and remain outside. I told myself pain could be controlled if it was hidden. I was wrong. I wronged this woman." She turned toward Nwando fully, then crying openly. I wronged you. The silence after her words felt heavier than all the noise before them, because now the whole shape of the betrayal stood naked before both kingdoms. A respected chief, a wife respected by women, a false marriage, stolen sons, years of suffering, and a mother walking roads in grief while her children called another mother. The elder sat very still, looking from one face to another, and when he finally spoke, his voice carried both authority and sorrow. What has happened here is not small. A woman was deceived under the cover of marriage. A father's house was dishonored with false kin. Children were taken from the womb that bore them. A home was built on lies. 2 villages have carried shame without knowing its full name. Today, that name is known. No one spoke. Even those who had come hungry for scandal now stood subdued before the human cost of it. Uzo and Eze, who had been brought and seated among younger men after hearing that a council concerning them would take place, sat like young trees struck by lightning. The words they had heard made no sense, and yet made too much sense, because suddenly, strange looks, strange silences, a market woman's cry, the old birth attendant's certainty, and even certain unanswered feelings inside the household all began rearranging themselves into a truth neither had expected. Azuka stared at Eze in disbelief. Uzo stared at the ground as if trying to hold himself steady against the shaking of the whole world. Their father had confessed. The woman from the market was not mad. The story was theirs, and around them, the kingdom itself was stunned into a silence that felt like the breath held before judgment. After Chief Ikechukwu and Azuka confessed before the elders and the whole truth stood naked in the open, the gathering remained silent for a long, heavy moment. Because sometimes a truth is so painful that even the people who came eager to hear it no longer know what to say once it is fully spoken. And that was how it felt that day, under the eyes of 2 kingdoms, with Nwando sitting like a woman whose heart had finally heard the voice it had chased for years, with Uzo and Eze sitting in stunned confusion, with Azuka trembling in shame, and with Chief Ikechukwu carrying the full weight of what he had done now that there was no more hiding place for any part of it. The oldest elder looked at everyone slowly before speaking again. And when he finally opened his mouth, his voice had the kind of force that makes people feel both judged and guided at the same time. What has happened here, he said, is not only a matter between one man and 2 women. It is a wound done to marriage, to motherhood, to family honor, and to the trust that holds communities together. A woman was deceived under the name of wife. A father's house was entered with false faces. Children were taken from the mother who bore them, and a home that should have stood on truth was built on fear and lies. Nobody interrupted him. Even the restless young men in the crowd remained still. The elder then turned his eyes toward Chief Ikechukwu and said, "You have acted with wicked wisdom. You used your position, your age, and your wealth to do what a poor man without power might never have managed. That makes your offense heavier, not lighter." Chief Ikechukwu lowered his head and said nothing. The elder looked next at Azuka. "And you, wife of his youth, fear entered your heart and made you help build a terrible thing. Suffering does not excuse wickedness. Desperation does not make deception clean. You knew another woman would bleed, yet you accepted that blood so long as it did not touch your doorway." Azuka began to cry again, but she did not defend herself because there was no defense left to give. Then the elder turned to Nwando, and his face softened, though his words did not lose their truth. "Daughter, what was done to you was cruel. And no person listening here can deny that. But hear this also. Long before deception entered your life, pride had already opened the door to sorrow in your path. You rejected wisdom while it still called gently. You despised good chances because your eyes were fixed only on greatness. None of that justifies the evil done to you. But if you leave this place without learning the full lesson of your life, then pain will have taught you much and still failed to change you." Nwando lowered her head, and tears rolled quietly down her face, not because the elder had insulted her, but because his word touched a truth she had come to know already through years of suffering. In a low voice, she said, "I hear." The elder nodded once, satisfied that she had not allowed pain to make her deaf to wisdom. He then lifted his staff slightly and declared, "As for the marriage that was done before, we do not recognize it as valid in the fullness of truth. The rites were performed with false witnesses and false kin. A marriage built on deception cannot stand with full honor before men or before the spirits of the land. Therefore, what was called marriage before is judged incomplete and corrupted." A loud murmur rose among the people. Some gasped, some nodded, some whispered that the elder had spoken rightly. Chief Ikechukwu looked up at once as if the full meaning of those words had struck him deeper than he expected. The elder continued, "If this woman is to be restored in dignity, it cannot be by quiet apology hidden in corners. It must be by open truth. If this man truly repents, let him return to Amaakwa with his real family, his true elders, his real kindred, and his honorable witnesses. Let the bride price be paid rightly. Let the woman be received with truth, not trickery. Let the wronged house be openly honored before both kingdoms." Another elder added, "And before that is done, compensation must be made for the shame and pain carried by her father's house. Though the father is dead and cannot hear it with his ears, his spirit will hear if justice is done." Then one of the elders from Amahakwa stood and said, "Her father died without knowing peace in this matter. We will not let that pass like smoke." Chief Ikechukwu finally lifted his head fully and spoke with the broken humility of a man whose pride had been crushed before many eyes. He said, "I accept the judgment. I will do all that is required." His voice shook slightly, but he did not hide from the words. The oldest elder looked toward Uzo and Eze then, and the whole gathering seemed to lean inward because everyone knew the boys had been standing inside two worlds since the truth opened. "Sons," he said, "you have heard what has been done. One woman carried you in pain and lost you through wickedness. Another woman raised you in care but carried hidden guilt all the years. The fault is not yours, the shame is not yours, but the road ahead will ask something hard of you, to accept truth even when truth warns what you thought your life was." Uzo's face was tight with restrained feeling. Eze's eyes were red, confused, angry, and afraid all at once. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eze turned and looked at Azuka with disbelief. "Mother, did you know?" The question came out like a child's cry, even though he was no longer a child. Azuka covered her mouth and nodded through tears. "Yes," she whispered, "I knew." Eze stared at her as if something inside him had fallen to pieces. "All these years?" She nodded again. "All these years." Then he turned toward Chief Ikechukwu. "And you? You took us?" Chief Ikechukwu's voice was rough. "Yes." Eze took a step back from both of them, shaking his head. "No, no." Uzo did not move so much, but his silence was sharper. He looked at Nwando slowly, as if seeing her properly for the first time, and all the pain of the market day returned to his mind with new meaning. He remembered how she had cried his name. He remembered how she had tried to touch his face. He remembered the wound in her voice when he told her not to touch him. That memory hit him now with such force that he had to lower his eyes. Nwando watched them both with a mother's heart breaking and healing at the same time, because at last they knew. Yet knowledge did not erase the years or close the distance in one breath. She did not rush toward them. She had learned from suffering that some truths need space before they can settle in another person's soul. So she only sat there crying softly, looking at them as if she had been thirsty for their faces all her life. The council ended that day not with celebration, but with solemn instructions and a heavy sense that something great and painful had turned. People went away speaking in low voices, not like gossips enjoying scandal, but like people who had seen a warning written on the life of another and knew it could teach many. Nwando returned home in deep silence. Her brother walked beside her, protective and watchful as always. After a long stretch of road, he said, "You have heard the truth from their own mouths. Does your heart feel peace now?" Nwando answered after a pause. "It feels many things, Peace is one of them. Pain is still there. But at least I am no longer walking in darkness. Her brother nodded. And if they come to marry you rightly? Nwando stopped walking for a moment. That is not a small thing to answer. Do you still love him? He asked quietly. Nwando looked far ahead before replying. Love after deceit is not simple. Part of me hates what he did. Part of me remembers the man he also was to me. Part of me only wants my sons. Part of me wants the world to see that I was not thrown away forever. I do not yet know how all these parts will settle. Her brother accepted the honesty in that answer and did not press her further. In Isingwa, the days after the council were heavy with tears and difficult silence. Uzo and Eze could barely look at their father without remembering the word stolen. They loved Azuka, yet now every memory of being held, taught, fed and protected by her carried the knowledge that another woman had been crying for them all that time. The daughters too were shaken deeply. The older one sat beside Azuka that evening and asked in a hurt whisper, "Why did you not trust us with the truth when we were old enough to bear it?" Azuka answered, "Because each year I believed silence would still protect the house. Then silence became too old and too heavy to lift." The younger daughter cried and said, "But another woman suffered while we were living in peace." At that, Azuka broke down again and said, "Do not think one day has passed without that suffering standing before me. I lived with it, but I did not stop it. That is my shame." Uzo withdrew into himself for a time. Eze grew more openly angry. One evening he confronted Chifikechku in the outer compound and said, "Was I just a son to secure your name?" Chifikechku looked at him and answered honestly, "At first, the plan was born from fear and pressure. But by the time I carried you, you were already my son in the deepest sense. That does not remove the wickedness. It only tells you that even a loving hand can be guilty." Eze's voice cracked. "Then why did you never tell us?" "Because cowardice grew where truth should have grown," Chifikechku said. Uzo, who was standing nearby in silence, finally spoke. "And what of the woman from the market?" Chifikechku shut his eyes briefly before answering. "She is your mother too." Uzo's face tightened. "Not two. First." That one word struck everyone present with its full weight. Meanwhile, preparations began for the true marriage, not as a private family repair, but as a public act of restoration. Messages were sent from Isingwa to Amakwa. Real elders were chosen, real kinsmen gathered, items were prepared properly, not hidden payments through strangers, but open, honorable offerings according to custom and dignity. Even those in Isingwa who felt shame about the matter agreed that only full openness could begin to clean what deceit had polluted. Chifikechku insisted on going himself to every elder who needed inviting and saying plainly, "I am coming not to celebrate myself, but to correct what I ruined." Some elders received him sternly, some rebuked him openly. One old kinsman said, "When men begin to think wealth can replace honor, the whole land becomes sick." Chifikechku bowed his head and accepted every rebuke, because repentance that argues too much is only wounded pride wearing new clothes. Ina Makwa, Nwando's brother, and the elders of her people discussed the matter carefully. Some said she should reject the marriage entirely and leave Chifikechku to carry his shame alone. Some argued that accepting him openly as husband after so much suffering would at least restore her honor and secure her place before all. Others said the greater matter now was the sons, that her mother should not stand forever outside the household where her own children had grown. Nwando listened to all these voices but made no hurried decision. At last, one evening she sat alone outside her late father's compound and spoke softly into the darkness, as if speaking to him and to her mother too. "I was proud once, and life broke that pride. I was deceived, and life showed me how cruel people can be. I searched and searched until I became someone else. If I refuse this marriage now, will my heart truly be free? If I accept it, can I enter without bitterness swallowing me? What is dignity now? What is peace?" No voice answered from the dark, but by morning her heart had become calmer. When the elders asked again what she wanted, she said, "I will not go as a hidden woman anymore. If he comes with truth, if he comes with his real people, if he bows before the shame he caused, then I will enter with honor, not as a secret. But if there is even one shadow of deceit left, let the road between us close forever." When that answer reached Isingwa, Chief Ikechukwu accepted it immediately. "She speaks rightly," he said. The day of the true traditional marriage came bright and solemn, and people from both kingdoms gathered in numbers greater than before, because now they were not coming to witness rumor or judgment, but correction. Chief Ikechukwu arrived in Amakwa with his real family, his actual kinsmen, respected elders of Isingwa, titled men, and those who could rightly stand as his people. And there was no false face among them, no hired stranger pretending blood, no hidden exchange of silver to replace honesty. The items came properly, the greetings were done properly, the names spoken were true, the lines of relationship were clear. The elders of Amakwa watched closely, and more than once, older men nodded to one another, acknowledging that what was happening now had a different spirit from the first ceremony. Nwando remained inside for part of the rites, dressed beautifully but modestly, with the calm dignity of a woman who had passed through fire and no longer needed beauty alone to prove her worth. When the time came for formal words, Chief Ikechukwu stood before the elders, before Nwando's people, before his own people, and before the many gathered witnesses, and he spoke without covering himself. "I came to this house once with a lie," he said. "Today I stand here with truth. I deceived your daughter. I dishonored her father's house. I used false men and false words. No apology can erase the suffering that followed. But I speak before all of you now. I am ashamed and I ask forgiveness. I ask forgiveness from the memory of her father, from her family, from this community, from my own household, and most of all, from Nwando herself." The whole place was quiet. Even children were hushed by the weight of his voice. Then he turned toward Nwando's brother and bowed his head lower. "You stood where a father's house needed a man to remain standing. Forgive what I brought to your people." Nwando's brother, who had carried anger like a live coal for years, answered with controlled firmness. "Forgiveness is not cheap, but truth has now been spoken before all. Let your future actions prove that your repentance is not only today's garment." Chief Ikechukwu accepted that and nodded. Compensation was given openly to Nwando's family in honor of the wrong done to their father's house. The elders blessed the correction. The bride's price was completed rightly. The rites were carried out with full dignity, and when Nwando finally emerged at the proper time, clothed beautifully and moving with a slow grace shaped by age, sorrow, and wisdom, there was a murmur through the crowd, not the shallow murmur of people praising only beauty, but the deeper murmur people give when they see a human life restored in public after long disgrace. Chief Ikechukwu looked at her and knew he was not seeing the same woman he first noticed in the palm wine bar years ago. That woman had been lonely and hopeful. The one before him now had suffered enough to stand in truth without begging for any man's favor. When the rites were concluded and the elders pronounced the marriage true and honorable before both kingdoms, some women cried quietly, some men clapped their staves to the ground, and Nwando herself lowered her head, with tears running down her face, not because all pain had vanished, but because the long insult of being hidden and denied had finally been broken before the eyes of everyone. Yet, the deepest work of restoration still waited ahead, because marriage rites could correct honor before society, but only hearts could rebuild family. When Nwando entered the household in Isingwa openly at last, Azuka did not remain hidden indoors or send greetings through others. She came out herself to meet her. That moment held the breath of many people, because some expected tension, coldness, or forced civility. But Azuka had already cried through too many nights to keep pride standing in front of the truth anymore. She walked toward Nwando slowly, dressed with dignity but without show, and when she stopped before her, her eyes filled. "I welcome you," she said softly, "not because the past can be undone, and not because I was innocent, but because truth has finally brought you where you should never have been denied." Nwando looked at her for a long moment, and all the years stood between them, the hidden plan, the stolen children, the silent guilt, the road of pain. Then, Azuka did something nobody would easily forget. She bent slightly in humility before Nwando and said, "Forgive me for the part I played in your suffering." Gasps rose softly around them, because for a first wife and mistress of a respected household to lower herself publicly like that was no small thing. Nwando's face trembled. She could have answered with bitterness. She could have spoken sharp words. She could have used that moment to return wound for wound, but suffering had changed her too deeply for that. Instead, she reached out and lifted Azuka gently by the hands and said, "We have both lost too much to build our future with more hatred." Those words did not erase the past, but they opened the only road by which peace could walk in. Uzo and Eze stood nearby, still struggling through their own storm of feeling. Since the council, they had spoken with Nwando more than once, first awkwardly, then more openly. The first true private meeting had been one of tears rather than smooth reunion. Nwando had sat before them with trembling hands and said, "I do not ask you to call me mother because others tell you. I ask only that you allow truth to sit among us." Uzo had looked at her long before saying, "I was cruel to you in the market." Nwando shook her head and answered, "You spoke from the life you knew. The cruelty belonged to those who hid the truth, not to you." Eze had cried openly that day and asked, "When you searched, did you truly never stop?" And Nwando replied, "The day a mother stops searching in her heart, she dies before her body follows." That answer broke him fully, and he had wept with his face in his hands, while Nwando, after years of longing, finally placed her hand on his head. Now standing in the compound after the true marriage, Uzo and Eze looked from Nwando to Azuka and back again, and everyone knew the next words mattered. Uzo stepped forward first. He was no longer the confused youth in the market, but a young man who had looked truth in the face and chosen not to run. He turned to Nwando and said in a voice thick with emotion, "What was stolen from you can never be fully returned. We cannot become children again. We cannot put back the years, but we can choose not to continue the lie. You gave us life. That truth will not be denied again." Tears rolled down Nwando's cheeks. Then Uzo turned to Azuka. "And you raised us. That too is true, even though pain stood behind it." Eze, crying already, moved between both women, took one hand of Nwando and one hand of Azuka, and said with the raw honesty of his heart, "I will not throw away the woman who raised me, and I will not turn my face from the woman who carried me. If my life began in one womb and grew in another pair of hands, then let my love be wide enough to honor both truths." At that, Nwando broke down completely and drew him into her arms while Azuka wept beside them, and even Uzo, who was more controlled, had to wipe his eyes and look away for a moment. The daughters came forward too, and the older one embraced Nwando respectfully and said, "You suffered because of choices made by our parents. We cannot erase that, but we will not stand against peace." The younger daughter hugged her and whispered, "You are part of this house now." Then they embraced Uzo and Eze again, not as boys whose place had become uncertain, but as brothers whose story had finally been named openly. Time did not suddenly make everything easy. Healing is never that childish. There were awkward days, quiet meals, memories that returned sharply, and moments when old pain rose without warning in one heart or another. Sometimes Nwanda would watch Azuka help with something and feel the stab of lost years. Sometimes Azuka would hear Edze call out to Nwando with a new tenderness and feel both gladness and grief. Sometimes Uzo sat alone thinking of how many times he had unknowingly walked past the truth. Sometimes Chief Ikechukwu looked at his whole family gathered together and felt gratitude so heavy with regret that it almost brought him to his knees. But because truth had finally entered the house, the pain no longer had to hide in corners and grow poison there. It could now be spoken, shared, wept over, and slowly healed. Chief Ikechukwu walked carefully to prove by action what his apology had promised. He honored Nwando publicly and privately. He gave her rightful space and respect in the household. He no longer hid any road from her. He made sure his son stood openly beside both women. He corrected anyone who tried to speak carelessly of the matter. He showed day after day that repentance is not one speech before elders, but a long discipline of truthful living. And so, when the season of the New Yam Festival came and the whole kingdom prepared with joy, color, music, and thanksgiving, the family that had once been held together by lies stood together in the open sunlight. The compound was lively that day. Women moved with beautiful wrappers and shining beads. Men greeted one another with energy and respect. Food was prepared in abundance. Drums sounded in the distance. Children laughed. Guests arrived from Amakua and Isingwa. Elders took their places. The whole atmosphere carried celebration. But beneath it, there was also the awareness that everyone present was about to witness something bigger than a festival meal. When the moment came for the family to be seen together, Chifikechuku stood with dignity. Azuka stood on one side, Nwando on the other, the daughters nearby, and Uzo and Edze before them like young pillars of a future once fought for in all the wrong ways and now finally standing in truth. Before food was served to others, the two sons carried portions first to both women. Uzo knelt and offered respectfully to Nwando and then to Azuka. Edze did the same, smiling through wet eyes. The crowd murmured with approval, and some older women openly wiped tears. The oldest elder, who had judged the case, stood and lifted his hand for attention. The festival quieted enough for his voice to carry. "People of these kingdoms," he said, "look well at what stands before you. This family was once broken by pride, fear, deception, and silence. A woman trusted beauty too much and wisdom too late. A husband allowed pressure and cowardice to turn him cruel. A wife allowed fear to make her unjust. Children were taken. Years were lost. Tears watered the ground. Yet today we stand not only to remember the evil, but to honor the truth that finally rose higher than it." He looked toward the young girls and boys listening too. "Learn from this. Beauty fades. Pride brings regret. Lies destroy families. Fear can make good people commit terrible acts if they do not resist it. But hear the other side also. Truth, repentance, and forgiveness can rebuild what wickedness breaks if hearts are willing to bow." He turned then toward Nwando and said, "You were humbled by life, but you did not die in bitterness." Toward Azuka, he said, "You sinned through fear, but you did not defend your sin forever." Toward Chifikechuku, he said, "You fell greatly, but at last you accepted shame and correction." Toward Uzo and Edze, he said, "And you sons, remember always that one woman gave you life and another raised you with care. Honor both without confusion and let your own future never be built by hiding truth from the innocent." The crowd answered in agreement. Drums sounded again. The festival continued. Food was shared, laughter returned, children ran, women sang. And as evening light softened over the kingdom, Nwando sat beside Azuka, not as a hidden rival or denied mother, but as a lawful second wife, whose dignity had been restored before all. She watched Uzo and Edze speaking together with their sisters, saw Chifikechuku standing a little apart with the humbled gratitude of a man who knew he had been given more mercy than he deserved. And in that quiet moment, she felt something settle fully in her heart at last. The years lost could not be returned. Her father and mother could not come back to see the ending with their own eyes. The pain of the road would always remain part of her story, but the shame had ended. The sons knew her. The household was no longer built on silence, and the life before her, though born late and through fire, was now standing in truth. So, when the drums rose higher and the New Yam Festival moved into full joy, Nwando lifted her face toward the evening sky and let tears of peace fall freely, because at last the woman who had once been ruined by pride, broken by deception, and driven by grief had entered the home of her sons with honor, and the family that lies had almost destroyed was now held together not by fear, not by secrets, but the hard-won mercy of truth, repentance, and forgiveness. This story teaches that beauty without humility can lead to regret, fear can push people into wicked decisions, lies may seem to work for a while, but they always destroy peace in the end, and no matter how painful the past may be, truth, repentance, patience, and forgiveness are the only things that can truly restore honor, heal broken families, and bring lasting peace. Thanks for watching this amazing story on African Stories by V. If you liked it and felt inspired, please show your support by clicking the like button, sharing with your friends, and leaving a comment below. To see more interesting stories and learn about different cultures, subscribe to African Stories by V, and don't forget to ring the notification bell so you never miss a new story. Your support means a lot and helps us bring more stories to you. Until we meet again, stay connected, stay inspired, and keep smiling.